According to the United Nations, India became the most populous country in the world in 2023. Can you guess where the United States of America stands in that rating? It's number 3. And America is the 4th largest country in terms of size. It takes up some 6% of Earth's landmass. Plenty of space for 335 million people who live there, right? No need to squeeze them into one region. Well, not quite. The population of the U.S. is distributed pretty unevenly. Let's draw a line right through the middle of the country. It'll run from North Dakota in the north to Texas in the south. Once you input census data and do some math, astounding figures appear. 80% of the U.S. population lives east of the imaginary line. The remaining 20% live to the west. That's just 1 in 5 Americans. We're talking about large metropolitan areas such as Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. You don't believe me? Just look at a satellite map of the U.S. at night. The right part is shining pretty bright, right? But why? Why is there such a huge imbalance in population? Simply put, history and geography. The East Coast is the place where the U.S. became independent in 1776. These are the original 13 colonies. Soon enough, settlers started spreading westward. One important milestone was the Louisiana Purchase. Today, this region is mostly what we call the Midwest. The area aligns nicely with the Mississippi watershed. Yup, this means plenty of fertile soil ideal for agriculture. But does this automatically mean a spike in population? The demographics of the U.S. reveal that a majority of its citizens live either on the east or the west coast. This leaves a large patch of land in the middle of the country virtually empty. People know it as America's underpopulated belt. The area stretches from the Canadian border in the north to Mexico in the south. The total surface area of this strip of land is 350,000 square miles. That's twice the size of California. One massive piece of land. In fact, this narrow strip accounts for 12% of the contiguous United States. That's the U.S. without Alaska and Hawaii. The belt runs north to south through 7 states, but its population makes up only 1% of the total number of people living in the United States. Now, this doesn't mean that the area is completely empty. It's still home to just over 3 million people. That's roughly the population of the island country of Jamaica. But there is room here for many more residents. Let's take the example of Nigeria. Its total land area is slightly bigger than the sparsely inhabited belt in America. But Nigeria's population is a huge 206 million people. This makes it the 7th most populated country on the planet. Impressive, right? But why isn't the American Midwest living up to its potential? Well, time for one last history lesson. I've already mentioned how the United States expanded from the East Coast to the West Coast. This doesn't mean that the West was lagging too far behind. Take, for example, the cities of San Francisco and Los Angeles. They were incorporated in 1850. That's just 13 years after Chicago. The following year, Portland, Oregon became incorporated. You get the picture. And then, in 1869, the United States completed building its first transcontinental railroad. In terms of transport, the country was unified. There is no historical reason strong enough to explain why so few people live in the center of the country. So now it's time for some interesting geography. If you look at the physical map of the United States, you'll notice that this belt lies in the Great Plains. As the name suggests, the area is flat, which should be ideal for large settlements. Well, not really. East of this region, there is a huge patch of the color brown. It's covered by mountains. But not just any mountains. These are the Rockies. The range is around 76 million years old. It has several peaks over 14,000 feet. And most of the Rockies are national parks, a vast nature reserve. But most importantly, the range plays a vital role in the region's climate. Ever heard of the rain shadow effect? Let me explain. Wet weather systems form over the Pacific Ocean. Then they travel east, where they meet the Rockies. Now the air has to go up over the mountains. This is where it cools down and condenses. The final result? A lot of rain and snow for the people living on or west of the range, and just a few drops east of it. When air from the Pacific finally reaches the Great Plains, it doesn't contain much moisture anymore. In fact, the weather system starts taking up moisture from the surrounding landscape. This creates an arid climate east of the Rocky Mountains. That's the exact location of the belt where so few Americans live. It's one of the driest parts of the country. So when settlers came in the 19th century, they were like, nah, I'll just continue west. Plus, there was the gold rush in California they were heading for. The climate in this part of the plains isn't great for agriculture, and huge fluctuations in air temperature don't help either. In a single day, temperatures can drop from 70 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. These sudden changes in outside temperature are harmful to human health. It's like stepping inside an air-conditioned room on a sizzling summer day. Not a pleasant feeling. Southern California has a similarly dry climate, yet close to 40 million people live there. This makes California the most populous U.S. state. Their secret? A vast network of irrigation canals and aqueducts, plus a share of water from the Colorado River. Summers in the Great Plains get very hot, while winters are extremely cold. The reason behind these wild weather patterns are polar winds. They get a piggyback ride along the ridges of the Rockies and then rapidly descend into the plains. A winter day in Wyoming, for example, can start pleasantly warm, but later in the afternoon, the temperature can easily drop below zero. You just wouldn't know how to dress, and you probably wouldn't want to relocate here. That's what 99% of Americans think too. Humans like to feel comfortable, so we choose to live in temperate climate zones. Places that are either too cold or too hot don't have a large population. Just look at the driest inhabited continent. You've guessed it correctly, it's Australia. Nearly 70% of the country is either arid or semi-arid. That's a subtle way of saying that it's a desert. That's why Australians are huddled in coastal areas. 90% of them live in big cities, such as Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. The only exception is the capital, Canberra. They build it inland close to a water source. But Australia's interior is sparsely populated. Just like in the States, there is only one major town in an area the size of 12 Lake Michigans. A huge shout-out to the residents of Alice Springs. They truly live in an oasis. And what about places with a temperate climate, like Europe? The population is evenly distributed here, right? Well, yes and no, depending on the country. In Germany, 77% of people live in urban areas. They have plenty of major cities to choose from. Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and Cologne all have over 1 million residents. But let's look at neighboring France. How many cities with a population over 1 million can you name? Okay, Paris, definitely. It has over 12 million residents in the metropolitan area. But now comes the staggering fact. The next two cities on the list have a population of barely 2 million, respectively. Can you notice the huge imbalance? This is the case in most large European countries. In Greece, for example, 35% of the population lives in the capital, Athens. So, the largely underpopulated center of the United States is not a unique example. America is the land of opportunities, but chances of finding a better life are greater in large cities. The country's top 100 metropolitan areas account for at least 3/4 of the nation's GDP, and most of them are located on the east and the west coasts. There are no cities with over 1 million residents in America's underpopulated belt. Okay, here's a quick pop quiz on geography and touristy stuff. What's the biggest city in Italy? Did you say Rome? Then you got it right. Rome has a population of over 2 million people. And what would you say is the current population of Venice? Well, that's a tricky one to know by heart. But to answer correctly, in 2022, it was a little over 258,000 people. Now, what if I told you that for 80% of them, the Venice they live in isn't the tourist and historical one with all the canals. It's rather the other side of town. If you know someone who's traveled to Venice before, they may have sent you a postcard with an image of a gondola in a canal. I bet you never imagined that Venice could also just look like this, just a regular old Italian city. As tourists, we have a strong misconception about what Venice is. We think the real Venice is what we see in the movies. Well, I hate to be the one to pop your illusion, but there's more to Venice than straight canals and old bridges. Here are the boundaries of the real Venice. Probably the postcards you get only picture this bit of the city called Centro Storico, or Historical Center. But the city also includes the mainland, called Terra Firma, where most Venetians live today. The interesting thing to look at is how the number of people living in the historical center has decreased over the years. From then on, the number started to reduce more with each passing year. Today, only 50,000 people can afford to live there. To understand that, let's travel back in time for a moment. Before Venice became an important Italian city, it was nothing but a fisherman's village. It was only around the 5th century that people decided to take a chance and build on the marshy ground of the Venetian islands. If you've ever wondered how Venice holds up, let's just say it's due to strong blocks of wood driven deep into the ground. As it turns out, you need oxygen and water to ruin wood, and in marshy soils, there isn't much oxygen, so the buildings were safe. It was during the Middle Ages that Venice became one of the world's most important maritime empires. You might remember that's where Marco Polo, the famous merchant and explorer, came from. The city was extremely well located, right in the Adriatic Sea, and had access to huge commercial empires of the time, like the city of Constantinople. At that time, the most prestigious jobs you could get were like the ones Marco Polo had, anything related to long-distance trading. Since then, Venice consists of 118 islands, and some say there are around 400 bridges in the city. Quick question here, can you name at least 2 of the most famous Venetian islands? Let's start with Burano. The island of Burano is famous for its lace-making and its super colorful landscape. FYI, Burano is also home to a less famous leaning tower than the one in Pisa. It's called the Tower of Burano. And then there's the island of Murano. They are famous for their products of fine glass. You can find anything from huge vases to water glasses, jewelry, and so on. They're quite exquisite, but also super expensive. But you know what they say, time changes everything. In the 20th century, Venice was no longer the trading hub it once was. Its economic power was failing seriously, so the city decided to invest in something else, its historical value. And the best way they found how to do that was through preservation. Let's face it, if you're a tourist who enjoys history, you would jump at the opportunity of visiting a UNESCO heritage site, wouldn't you? Initially, this was rather good for the city. But the thing is, as tourism in Venice skyrocketed, the old dynamics of the city started to change to keep up with the intense tourism. Truth is, in our day and age, lots of tourists rather buy small and cheap souvenirs than invest their money in expensive manufactured goods, such as the classic Murano glasses. The traditional Venetian stores that were open hundreds of years ago just didn't have the economic power to compete with new stores that opened to cater specifically for tourists. And then, what happened next is something we often call falling down the rabbit hole. Because, as it turned out, tourists attracted more tourists, and Venice lost control over it. The maximum sustainable number of tourists in Venice would be around 22,500 people per day. But in 2021, Venice saw up to 80,000 tourists per day in certain parts of the year. If you remember that there are only 50,000 people living in Venice's historical center nowadays, that almost means that tourists outnumber locals by 2 to 1. This is what gave Venice one of its current nicknames amongst the locals, which is a short-term city. I mean, if you live in a touristy city such as New York City or Paris, you'd be sure to avoid the parts of the city that are more touristy. But in Venice, that's difficult, since we're talking about several small islands. Whether you want it or not, the city is constantly packed. Locals started to complain that things such as getting a table at a restaurant or crossing an important square, such as Piazza San Marco, would take hours. Not to mention that instead of normal car traffic, well, in Venice, you can experience some gondola traffic. But that's not even the worst that's been happening. As the number of tourists per year started to rise exponentially, so did the infrastructure to accommodate all these people. When landlords understood that they could make more money off of tourists than they could with locals, overall prices started to soar. That's why, from the 1950s onward, fewer Venetians were able to continue living in the city's historical center. Landlords decided to more than double the prices of housing. So, a family that paid around 800 euros for their apartment now had to pay something around 1,500 euros to stay in the same place. And social services couldn't even do anything about it because there were so many similar cases happening all over the historical center. This may sound like something small, but when you stop to look at the big picture, it's changing the social fabric of the city. Yep, that's what usually happens in super touristy places. France is having to deal with a similar problem of overtourism. France's Ministry of Tourism has concluded that tourists are spending less money, yet overexploiting the classic tourist landmarks. Cities are made up of much more than just buildings and infrastructure. As urban sociologist Georg Simmel said, cities need to be heterogeneous, and by raising the prices of rent so much, the first ones to be kicked out of the city were the younger generations. After that, only well-established elderly people could afford to stay in the city center. Things started getting so out of hand in Venice's historical center that UNESCO itself threatened to put the city on its list of heritage sites in danger of severe damage. That's tough, huh? The city is still trying to find ways to mitigate the effects of tourism. The first thing they did was to ban those huge cruise ships from stopping in the city's historical area. Oh, and the city produced a tourism fee. Normally, anyone sleeping in the historical center already pays a fee. But nowadays, tourists have to register their entry and pay a daily fee for exploring the main island. The profits from this fee are directed toward making life in Venice's city center more affordable. Hopefully these policies will allow Venetians to move back to Venice's city center. Ciao!
Why is Australia so strangely empty? Why haven't we discovered so much of the ocean? Is our planet a perfect sphere? And was the Earth once more purple than green? I bet you didn't know these facts about our planet, so let's find it all out. Australia is really massive. To make it easy to understand its size, it's nearly as large as the entirety of Europe. Home to around 26 million people, Australia is among the countries with the least population per area. It's ranked only 55th for the highest population in the world, while it has the 6th largest land area. Why is so much of it empty? A good guess would be the many dangerous animals hiding behind every rock. At least this is enough for me to avoid Australia. But there's one specific reason to explain this. The dryness of Australia ensures that 85% of the population lives within 30 miles of the coast, and 80% of them live along the eastern side, where rainfall is more common. But although there is an overall lack of rainfall, only 20% of Australia is unlivable desert, and only 40% is considered not habitable by human standards. The water consumption is actually higher than their average rainfall each year, but there is a further ancient water source hidden way below, which can support a much larger population. It's one of the largest underground freshwater resources in the world, the Great Artesian Basin. It covers a staggering 656,000 square miles, which is 1/5 the size of Australia. It holds enough water to cover the Earth under a 1.5 feet deep layer of water. Or, more usefully, it could provide enough water for thirsty Australians over the next 1,500 years. Only 6.5% of Australia has soil suitable for farming, so this doesn't seem like a huge amount. But in case you forgot, Australia is big, and this small percentage is about the size of France. With this massive area available for farming, Australia has more than enough to feed its population, with a further 70% of agriculture products that are exported overseas. So, with plenty of land, food, and water, why are the population figures so low? A very slow migration process is the reason. First, only people from the United Kingdom lived there. Then, they opened their borders to other Europeans, and this restriction remained in place until 1973. You would think almost 200 years would be enough time for a lot of people to migrate, but Australia was just so far away. The risk of traveling such a long way and the cost of the journey meant that people from Europe prefer the shorter and cheaper options to migrate elsewhere, like Canada or the USA. For the past 2,000 years, people have understood that Earth is round. But did you know that it's not a perfect sphere? Through the wobbly rotation of Earth, our planet constantly changes its size, very slowly of course. The North and South poles are surprisingly flat. Earth is pretty much like a ball being squished. Imagine there's a giant hand with the fingers pressing at both poles. Because of this pressure, the equator pushes a little outwards. Along with an uneven gravitational field, Earth has loads of gravity glitches, some positive and others negative, creating an uneven, rocky, and bumpy surface. Some places on Earth have more gravity than others. If you weighed yourself along the equator, you would weigh 0.5% less than at the poles. Not a whole lot, and definitely not worth the trip to change your weight. If you were to measure the length from the center of the Earth towards the furthest point of Earth, you would be shocked that Mount Everest isn't at the end of it. Instead, it's along the equator, which is the pushed-out part. Ecuador's mountain Chimborazo would actually be the tallest point on Earth, as it's the furthest from the center. We still have around 80% of the ocean to map, which is crazy considering how much of the solar system we've explored in comparison. But we're still aware of many of the unbelievable details about the ocean. It covers over 80% of the world's surface, where 94% of the Earth's wildlife lives. And from some of the life in it, up to 80% of the world's oxygen is produced mainly from plankton, algae, and bacteria. One of the most famous, already mapped places is the Mariana Trench. It's the deepest point on Earth, as low as almost 7 miles deep. That's a huge, 5 times the length of the Grand Canyon and deeper than Mount Everest is tall. It's also home to one of the most ancient seabeds on Earth, casually laying low for about 180 million years. The pressure at the bottom is over 1,000 bars, but although this is 1,000 times more than normal pressure, life still flourishes here. Throughout the ocean, there is an estimated over 3 million shipwrecks lying in the murky depths. Countless artifacts sit there untouched, and there could be more than all the world's museums. The mid-ocean ridge is the longest in the world, reaching 40,000 miles. That's almost 10 times the size of the Andes, the longest mountain range on land. The sun is the reason behind the blue and aqua colors of the ocean. This color isn't from the reflection of the sky, though they are both blue for the same reason. The surface of our planet receives white light from the sun, and it absorbs the orange, red, and yellow light stronger. It doesn't absorb the blue light so much, so it returns to how we see it. Of course, this only occurs based on how pure the water is. If the water is full of mud or algae, they scatter the light and overpower the water's natural blueness. There are many factors that determine what color we see on our planet. Could you believe that the Earth was green before? Instead, it was purple. Chlorophyll in our atmosphere absorbs mainly blue and red wavelengths from the sun and reflects the green ones to what we see our planet as today. Long ago, ancient microbes called retinal dominated the Earth instead of chlorophyll. They absorbed green light and reflected red and violet light. Those microbes had a simpler structure, so they were easier to produce in the low oxygen environment of the early Earth. They provided our planet with a purplish color instead of green. But chlorophyll is more efficient, and as the Earth was developing, it eventually took over. Imagine that billions of years ago, faraway observers could see our home as a small purple dot. I wonder if we could have also been purple. Probably not. The biggest tree on Earth is a giant sequoia named General Sherman. It stands over 280 feet, almost reaching the height of a 26-story building. They believe it to be 2,700 years old, with a circumference of 1,000 inches. Its weight is a staggering 1,800 tons. That's heavy, but it isn't the heaviest living thing on Earth. In Utah, a huge grove of trees called Pando works like a single colony of trees. The massive root system connects all of them together with up to 47,000 stems. It weighs up to 6,000 tons and is 80,000 years old. It makes it the oldest living thing known to humans. Now, what about the biggest area of one being? Off the coast of Western Australia, a seaweed grows to an unthinkable size. The Poseidon's ribbon weed has been growing for 4,500 years, spreading underground clone shoots. It's all connected and shares the same DNA with most of its shoots. It covers a massive 77 square miles, the same size as 28,000 soccer fields, or the size of Nebraska. And it won't stop there either, as it continues to grow by 2 feet each year. It's hard to even picture the scale of these enormous beings. Now, just imagine if they were all purple.
You're chilling in Hawaii, on the island of Oahu. A friend calls you up. Hey, I'm here too. Meet me in Maui. Great, but how do you get there? Your first thought is probably to take a ferry, but that's impossible. Hawaii is a pretty unique place. It's the most expensive state to live in. It has its own official language besides English. And it's the only American state made up entirely of islands. Hawaii has a total of 137 islands. 8 are the main ones, but only 6 are open to tourists. And the distance between those islands is probably bigger than you'd expect. For example, traveling from Oahu to the Big Island is around 185 miles, which is about the same distance as Chicago to Indianapolis. You might be surprised that you can't make that trip by boat. In fact, the only ferry system that actually takes passengers in Hawaii runs between Maui and Lanai. That's it. So your only option is to travel between islands is by plane. Honestly, it's a little surprising, especially considering how many people visit Hawaii every year. Tourism pretty much drives their economy, and in the first 8 months of 2024 alone, over 6 million people visited its beautiful beaches. Knowing that, we would expect Hawaii to set up a good ferry system to make it easier for visitors to get around. Just like in Greece. This would probably boost tourism even more, bringing more money to the state. But believe me, authorities and private companies also know that. In fact, they've already tried it. Ferries were a big way of getting around in Hawaii from the 19th century up until the 1950s. Since then, there have been a few attempts to bring back a ferry service, but unfortunately, they have all failed. One of the biggest attempts was the Hawaii Super Ferry, which aimed to provide a fast, affordable boat service between islands. It could carry almost 900 passengers and even allow them to bring their own cars along. The trial run started in 2007, and people were excited, but it turned into a big fiasco. A bunch of legal and environmental issues came up, like concerns about the impact on marine life, especially whales. The courts decided the ferry didn't go through the proper environmental reviews, and that caused a lot of trouble. By 2009, after tons of protests and setbacks, they had to shut it down. If a project like this comes up again, it will probably fail one more time. And there are a few reasons why it's almost impossible to set up a regular ferry system there. Let's start by talking about Hawaii's rough waters. They are deep and wild. Take the Alenoiaha Channel, for example. It's a 30-mile stretch that separates Maui from the Big Island. Its name means Great Billow Smashing Channel, and it lives up to that. It's over 6,000 feet deep, making it one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth. The wind there is also super strong, the fastest in Hawaii's coastal waters. But it's not any easier in the rest of the archipelago. The whole region gets hit by storms from the Pacific up north, sending big waves crashing into the islands and making the waters rough and unpredictable. Swells can come from 3, 4, or even more directions, making the sea feel really choppy. Someone who's not used to taking ferry boats would definitely find that, well, uncomfortable, to say the least. To deal with rough seas like this, the ferries have to be really big and strong. But that also makes them more expensive and harder to run than the ones in places like Alaska or Washington State. Another reason it's so tough to set up this system today has to do with marine life. A big ship moving through the shallower waters when docking could really damage the local ecosystem. And there's also the problem that the sea routes are also the migration paths of many sea animals, like humpback whales and spinner dolphins. Not to mention, ferry services can make it easier to spread harmful plants and animals, what experts call invasive species. See, Hawaii's ecosystem is super unique because it's been isolated out in the middle of the Pacific. When we talk about plants and animals that are native to Hawaii, we mean they got there on their own, no humans involved. They arrived with the help of waves, wind, or even birds flying over. But events like these are super rare, so for over 70 million years, their plants and animals didn't have to deal with outside competition. That's made them really fragile. So, when new species get brought in by us, it can be a big problem, and they could end up harming the environment. Hawaii's already been battling invasive species like fire ants, coqui frogs, and meconium, a fast-growing plant from South America that takes over native forests. People there worry that ferries, which carry cars and cargo between islands, could accidentally spread these invaders even more. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, the long distances between their lands don't really help either. For example, if you were to travel from Oahu to the big island of Hawaii by boat, it would take around 30 hours, and that's without any stops. The same trip by plane takes about 50 minutes. Ferries that cover long distances are much more expensive, so they need a much bigger demand to make them profitable. On top of that, the state doesn't really have the infrastructure, like enough ports and terminals to support the operations. So setting up new routes is pretty much out of the question. Airplanes, on the other hand, are a different story. The air travel industry in Hawaii is already well established and super competitive. That means flying is still the most practical option in Hawaii. Planes are quick, they don't make you seasick, and are pretty affordable, usually costing around $100 for a round trip. Okay, but what do the locals think about all this? Well, apparently, there isn't a huge demand for residents to commute between the islands all that often. Oahu is the busiest island in Hawaii, with about 70% of the state's population living there. It is where Honolulu, the capital, is located, and where most of the state's business happens. So, people from the other islands usually come over for a specific doctor's appointment or to catch a big concert. And that might happen once or twice a year, no more than that. So, even if people could choose between taking a ferry and a plane for these special occasions, most of them would probably still prefer flying. There are plenty of options between the main island airports. Planes usually start flying around 5 in the morning, and there are flights available every hour until the last one, which is usually at 9 in the evening. If you've been dreaming of going to this paradisiacal place but are worried about spending too much on plane tickets, I have some tips for you. First off, keep in mind that visiting all the main islands in 5 days or less is way too ambitious. So, if you don't have much time to spend there, think about your priorities. Each of the 6 islands open to tourists has its own vibe and activities. But you don't need to visit them all in one trip, and you can save some money by sticking to fewer islands. You can still explore the diversity of the islands by picking 2 that offer a nice contrast to each other. For example, while Oahu has that bustling city energy, Kauai has a much more relaxed vibe. Also, flights in the morning are usually cheaper, and it might be better to fly on a weekday rather than the weekend, although the price difference isn't usually huge. Hopefully these tips will save you some cash while still having an unforgettable island hopping adventure in Hawaii. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who's also dreaming of exploring these amazing islands.
Canada is massive, but almost everyone lives in the east or the west. And right in the middle, there is this huge stretch of land where hardly anyone calls home, Northern Ontario. So why does this place almost feel off limits? Northern Ontario is part of, well, Ontario. It's a super busy province, home to major cities like Toronto and Ottawa. About 1/3 of all Canadians live there, but most of them are down in the southern part of the province, not up north. But that doesn't really add up when you think about it because the northern part is way, way bigger. We're talking about a region that is more than 300,000 square miles, pretty much the same size as the whole country of Turkey. Northern Ontario takes up about 87% of the entire province. But, strangely, only about 6% of Ontario's population lives in this area. But before you start dreaming about moving there for some peace and quiet, hold on. There are 4 big reasons people choose not to, and honestly, you'll probably agree. Reason number 1, the land itself. Look up the region on Google Earth, and all you will see is a huge stretch of empty space. Nothing special at first glance, but zoom in, and that's when things start getting complicated. Northern Ontario is famous for its rugged, remote landscapes, full of endless forests and lakes. It's beautiful to look at or snap a photo of, but living there is a whole different story. The geography makes the area tough to get around and makes it hard to build things like transportation routes and railways. And since it's so difficult to put decent roads up there, the whole region stays pretty isolated. That takes us to reason number 2, remoteness. You might think that, being in the center of the country, it could serve as a great link between the eastern and western parts of Canada. But in reality, that's not how it works, and the region is very far from Canada's major cities. Take Greater Sudbury, the largest city in Northern Ontario, with around 160,000 people. The closest major city is Toronto, which is about 230 miles away. So yeah, that's roughly a 4-hour drive just to get there. If you're planning a holiday weekend in a big, dynamic city, a 4-hour drive sounds like a fun road trip. But if you need to go for a dental appointment or sort out paperwork, that distance suddenly feels endless, not to mention the cost. Unfortunately, that's how life is for many people up there. Residents of Northern Ontario don't have easy access to opportunities or services. With so few people scattered across such a huge area, the region doesn't have enough facilities, infrastructure, or easy access to essential services like healthcare and education. People there sometimes have to deal with poor or even non-existent infrastructure, like missing roads, airports, hospitals, and schools. Without those things, settling down is really tough. And in rural areas, it's even worse, because the lack of services can seriously hurt their quality of life. Psychologically speaking, that's not great either. People can end up feeling isolated and lonely, and the freezing weather doesn't help. Which brings us to reason number 3 why most people don't live in Northern Ontario: the harsh climate. If you're not a fan of cold weather, you should definitely leave this region off your travel bucket list. Winters up there can be long and brutal, with temperatures sometimes dropping as low as 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Have you ever tried shoveling snow when it's this cold? Yeah, it's not exactly fun. That kind of harsh weather doesn't just mess up your weekend plans or your daily jog. It also makes transportation a huge challenge. The result is that many residents end up isolated from essential services and job opportunities. And it's also really hard to build infrastructure, grow industries, or run businesses because of that harsh climate. Take farming, for example. Compared to southern Ontario, the northern region has a shorter growing season and much colder weather. Although crops like oats, potatoes, and green beans can handle the cold, the climate usually limits the variety of things that can be grown. That's why most farms are concentrated in the southern part of the province, and in other parts of the country, like the prairies and Quebec. Anyway, that's just one example of how the climate makes it tough for people to build a strong foundation to support themselves. And that's exactly the 4th reason why Northern Ontario is so empty: the economy. It's not that there aren't any jobs available. In fact, there are plenty. In 2023, the northern part of Ontario had some of the highest job vacancy rates in the country. So unlike in many parts of the world, it's a place where they have tons of jobs available, but no people to fill them. One reason people don't take those jobs is that many of them are older. Just look at Elliott Lake, for example. 42% of the people living in the city are over 65 years old. That's the third highest concentration of older adults anywhere in Canada. But it's not all that different in the rest of the region either. Estimates show that by 2036, people aged 65 and older will make up almost 30% of Northern Ontario's total population. And you see what happens when they hit 65, right? They've got their pensions, and going back to work just isn't on the radar. This problem only gets worse because young people just don't seem interested in living there. Every year, lots of students around 17 or 18 years old pack their bags and either drive across the province or fly across the country to study somewhere away from their northern homes. And many of them don't come back. But that's actually pretty strange considering the region does have a strong economy, especially in mining. Take the Red Lake area, for example. It's packed with gold. In fact, it's home to one of the richest gold deposits in the world and has already turned out over 30 million ounces of the metal. That's definitely helped Canada stay ranked among the top 5 gold-producing countries in the world. Then, there's this region, known as the Ring of Fire. It's centered around McFaulds Lake in the Kenora district and covers about 1,900 square miles. It's rich in valuable minerals like chromite, cobalt, nickel, copper, and platinum. These days, Northern Ontario's mining industry is making a big comeback and attracting new investments. That's happening because the world is suddenly desperately looking for critical minerals. By that, I mean essential elements used in modern technologies like smartphones and renewable energy systems. Minerals like cobalt, nickel, and copper are especially important for making the batteries that power electric cars, for example. So, right now, it seems like the whole mining scene in the region is doing pretty well. But the industry has gone through plenty of ups and downs, with fluctuations and periods of decline. And that, combined with the possible lack of variety and jobs outside the mining industry, means people are more likely to leave the region in search of better opportunities. Interestingly though, mining companies are now struggling to find enough skilled workers in Northern Ontario. And that's probably because of all the reasons we've already talked about: an older population, harsh weather, tough geography, and a long distance from major urban centers. So, it's basically a cycle. And local authorities are trying to break out of it by improving infrastructure in the region, offering more incentives, and finding ways to keep young workers from leaving. Some of their strategies include offering cash rewards to people who refer healthcare workers for job openings or providing tax-free payments to help cover higher home energy costs. And there are plenty of other initiatives too. So yeah, with strategies like these, it's definitely possible to grow the population there. And who knows, maybe one day this region could be bustling with people.
People in the U.S. consume around 100 acres of pizza every day, which is almost the size of Vatican City. Also, they drink 146 billion cups of coffee a year. Now, with that amount of coffee, you could fill an average-sized lake in approximately 10 years. But you couldn't fill Lake Superior because it has enough water to cover the whole U.S. with 1 foot of liquid. Now, people in the U.S. generally don't live in rural states like Wyoming, and because of that, more people live in New York than in 39 out of 50 states of the U.S. At the same time, Wyoming is the 10th largest state in the U.S. It's bigger than the U.K., but it's also the least populated state. You could drive through it for hours without seeing a single person. And because there's no strangers around, locals don't even lock their doors. Also, the whole state only has 2 escalators. Count them. Nestled within Wyoming's borders is iconic Yellowstone, the country's first national park. Now, living in Wyoming can be likened to playing a game on hard mode. It's one of the windiest and coldest states. The weather is genuinely wild, and it's not for everyone. There are also positive things about Wyoming, like its affordable stay and endless outdoor activities. It has a population of 576,000 people. That number of inhabitants could fill a small city. But everything you love about the outdoors can be found here, and that's why people choose this state. Vermont is the muddiest state in the U.S. It even has its own Loch Ness Monster. In the 17th century, European cartographer Samuel de Champlain reported seeing a 20-foot monster in Lake Champlain, named after him, that was as thick as a barrel and had a head like a horse. And since then, many more people have allegedly seen this creature. Vermont is an excellent state with tons of natural beauty. It's the perfect place for starting a farm. The state has a population of a little over 500,000 people. There are more folks in a few blocks in New York than the entire state of Vermont. It's a rural place, not ideal for building huge cities. But if you love farms and maple syrup, then Vermont is a haven for you. It produced over 2 million gallons of maple syrup in 2003. Vermont is also very cold, so people have invented snow golf. They would paint golf balls red and play in the winter on hard, icy snow. Now let's talk about the largest state in America, Alaska, the last frontier. This state is so big that it could fit 19 other states. But when it comes to population, Alaska could be doing a bit better. It has stunning natural beauty, like huge forests and lakes. At the same time, there's a lot of wildlife, which can sometimes be frustrating. Imagine sitting in your garden and getting visited by a grizzly bear or a wolf. Part of the problem is that the cities are too far apart. It's at least a 6-hour drive from one city to another. Still, if you love the outdoors, Alaska is the place for you. Plus, you get paid to live there. But there is a problem. As we all know, Alaska is not connected to the rest of the U.S., so most goods have to travel a long way, meaning everything is quite expensive there. And one of the biggest reasons people don't like living there is that it's freezing. You must shovel tons of snow just to get outside and do simple tasks. Around 700,000 people live in Alaska year-round. And if you ask them, they'll probably tell you that they like it there because there aren't many people around. When you think of South Dakota, the first thing that comes to mind is Mount Rushmore, and that is basically it. The state has a population of a little under 1 million and is practically empty. It has harsh weather and it's pretty far from everything. But the people of South Dakota are super friendly. If you go there, you'll feel welcome. Also, as with many other states, the beauty of nature might surprise you. North Dakota is similar to South Dakota, but a little more challenging than South Dakota. The state has tough winters, hot and humid summers, and no big cities. And if that wasn't enough, it also has a lot of floods. When people hear about this, they usually stay away, despite Dakota being a beautiful state. It has a population of 780,000 people, making it the fourth least populated state in the U.S. When settlers were moving there, only a tiny number of people remained in the end. Many moved to Canada, where farmland is better, thanks to better weather and more fertile soil. North Dakota has some unique benefits, like low cost of living and low unemployment rates. And if you are a nature lover, you won't be disappointed. It has 13 state parks and 3 national parks, all with fantastic scenery. Delaware is a small state with an even smaller population. The biggest city in Delaware is Wilmington, which has a population of 70,500 people. As for the whole state, it has around 1,031,890 people. It also has 2 million corporations, but no big cities. You may wonder about the reason. Well, they don't pay income taxes there, and those corporations are not actually located in Delaware, meaning that the local people there really don't benefit from them. The state is prone to storms. Philadelphia, which is close to Delaware, has fewer storms and is closer to major cities, so corporations simply move there. Most people who live in Delaware are retired. They don't need jobs, but love the fantastic beaches this state offers. Hey there, cowboy! We're going on a horse ride to the most beautiful state with teeming wildlife, which houses one of the best national parks, Glacier. Of course, I'm talking about Montana. This state has a little over 1 million people and is bigger than Japan in territory. But Japan has around 111 times more people than Montana. Why? Well, most people don't want to be cowboys. Generally speaking, people tend to like living in big cities, which Montana doesn't have. Plus, Montana has tough winters and expensive houses. And people don't like being cold. That's why Florida has so many people. Rhode Island has a population of a bit over 1 million, making it the 8th smallest state in the USA. Rhode Island is a small, flat coastal state. If you climb on a chair, you might see the whole state. Just kidding, you can't do that. By territory, it's the smallest state in the US, but it's densely packed with people. At the same time, the inhabitants of this state are gradually leaving it. The cost of living there is high, so they would rather go somewhere more affordable. Now let's say you're from Canada. In this case, if you accidentally teleported to Maine, you wouldn't even notice it, because the landscape would look almost the same. Maine has beautiful lakes, mountains, dense pine trees, and many moose. If you see one, stay away. Maine is truly a beautiful state, but it has a small population of around 1,300,000 people. Maine has terrible winters, so almost everyone lives near the coast or as far south as possible to escape crazy snowstorms that are common here. Because of this, 89% of Maine is covered with forests. This is one of the reasons why there aren't many industries here. Portland is the biggest and most beautiful city in this state, but only around 38% of the population lives in cities. Most inhabitants of the state are avid outdoor lovers.
A bridge, a very helpful structure that traces back to the Neolithic times. The oldest bridge in the world, at least the one that is still standing, is the Arcadico Bridge, built more than 3,000 years ago. But there's a river you cannot cross using a bridge: the Amazon River, the largest and longest river in the world. Okay, the Nile River is actually the longest river in the world, but the Amazon wants both titles for itself. The Amazon River is born in Peru and crosses Colombia and Brazil until it reaches a massive delta at the Atlantic Ocean. Its waters travel a longer distance than Frodo and Sam, and yet not a single bridge has ever been built over it. Why is that? First of all, seasonal floods change the size of the river. During dry seasons, the Amazon is about 3 miles wide. But during heavy rains, it can get up to 30 miles wide in a few weeks. Not only that, but the flood also makes the river change its position. Now imagine trying to build a bridge in a place where the ground turns into water for about 4 months. Not an impossible task, but not the easiest one either. Now, if you look back at your geography classes, you might remember that the soil of the riverbank can be very soft, especially in the Amazon, which means it can erode and shift. Heavy rains also create marshes, a type of wetlands that actually reduces the magnitude of the floods and purifies the water. It's also home to many animals. This means that to build a bridge, part of this wetland would have to be drained, which would ruin the lives of all those animals. Besides, the foundations of said bridge would have to be deep, and that would cost a lot of money. The rain creates yet another problem for the potential bridge. It increases the river's water level by 13 to almost 50 feet. Of course, bridges have been built in deep rivers before, like the Padma Bridge, a gigantic structure with a foundation of 417 feet. But because the soil of the Amazon River can erode easily, a bridge would have to be built using floating structures, known as pontoons, and they're not helpful in a river that changes depth whenever it feels like it. Next on our list of things that are a problem to human endeavors is the Amazon rainforest. This forest spreads over 9 countries and is so big and so dense it could cover about half of Europe. This means that a bridge would almost likely connect one patch of the forest to another. A pointless improvement to the lives of capybaras and jaguars. Of course, the real users of such a bridge would be humans. Most people live around the tributaries of the Amazon River, not around the river itself, because who wants to live like a beaver at a dam? There's even a state called Amapá on the left side of the Amazon River that is completely cut off from the rest of Brazil. You could easily take your car and visit its neighbor, a place called French Guiana. But if you wanted to go to another part of Brazil, you'd have to find other means of transportation. Aside from small riverside populations that live right on the riverside, of the Amazon, bigger cities were built near tributary rivers, like the Rio Negro, which has a bridge, by the way, and the Nanay River in Peru. The bridges that go over the Nanay and the Rio Negro are the only two bridges over the rivers in the Amazon basin. The lack of good roads and highways inside the Amazon also makes the creation of bridges a pointless endeavor. Back in the 70s, humans had big ideas on how to explore the Amazon ever more, which is why they decided to build a highway which would cut the Amazon basin from left to right. The road, called the Trans-Amazonian Highway, was supposed to bring people to the heart of the Amazon. But it seems like the difficulties of building more than 2,000 miles of road inside a dense rainforest were not foreseen. Halfway through, the project was abandoned because it was super expensive and problematic. Nowadays, highways in the Amazon basin are always flooded, filled with holes and mud. This whole situation creates a ripple effect. People don't live near the river because it's hard to access it. The roads don't go there either, because it's hard to build them. Which in turn makes even fewer people want to settle on the banks of the Amazon River, because they have no roads to get them there. So, if there are no roads and no bridges, how do people live there? You're not gonna believe this, but the riverside population uses a very old but reliable invention called a boat. The Amazon River is fully navigable, and the people that live there use it like a road. Much like motorcycles, cars, and buses, the Amazon River has canoes, speedboats, and ferries. There's even a very specific ferry called Obidense, transporting people to the municipality of Óbidos, hence the name. Locals do everything on boats. They even have a boat hospital that floats around and visits riverside populations, and a boat bank, so you can do all your bank-related things while looking at the vastness of the Amazon. Honestly, genius invention. The downside to this lack of bridges is that it stops us from exploring the truly hidden gems of the world. In the Amazon, for example, there are over 10,000 undiscovered archaeological sites. We may never be able to dig out stuff like fortified villages, geoglyphs, and many other structures. It would be pretty neat to go full-on Lara Croft in the middle of the Amazon, but these findings are tucked deep in the heart of the forest. At the same time, only on a boat are you able to witness the crazy phenomenon of the unmixed waters of the Rio Negro and the Solimões on the Amazon River. For more than 3 miles, these two tributaries of the Amazon River flow side by side without mixing. The speed and the temperature of these waters are different, so you'll see a river that looks like coffee and Coca-Cola mixed. This awesome phenomenon is called the meeting of waters. But the Amazon River is not the only river in the world deemed bridgeless. The Congo River, the second longest river in Africa, only has one bridge crossing it. The two Congos, yes, there are 2 different countries in the world named Congo, are separated by the Congo River, and so far, no roads connect them. Also, fun fact, some geologists believe that back when Gondwana existed and the continents were all cuddled together, the Amazon and the Congo River were one river connected to each other. Another place with a lack of bridges is the east side of the Thames in London. The west side of the river is narrower, which makes building a bridge easier. There are about 33 bridges on the west side alone, but if you want to cross the river from the east side, it's gonna be a hassle. The thing is, back in the 1800s, shipping companies decided that building too many bridges over the Thames was too expensive, because this was a shipping route and the bridges would have to be taller than usual. The structure would also have to be long, since some parts of the Thames are about 1,870 feet wide. But building long bridges is not a problem per se. In Rio de Janeiro, for example, you can find the Rio Niterói Bridge, which is about 8.26 miles long. Back when it was built in the 70s, it was the second longest bridge in the world. The bridge is so long that in 2018, a girl was born while her mother was crossing it, and now the birthplace in her birth certificate is literally the bridge. There's also no U-turn on it, so if you drive onto the bridge by mistake, you're in for a long drive. So next time you feel like exploring the Amazon, remember to pack your own boat. In Asia, there's a bridge that is way longer than you'd think should even be possible. The HZMB stretches 34 miles over open water, which makes it the longest sea bridge in the world. So if something this massive can make it across rough waters, why can't New Zealand just build a bridge between its two main islands? After all, we're talking about a distance of just 14 miles. And a bridge like that could seriously change life for both locals and tourists. People could just hop in a car and drive from Wellington to Picton. No more ferry hassles, no more drawn-out trips. Just one epic road journey with ocean views on both sides. So what's stopping them? Well, turns out, everything. I mean, building a bridge there is technically possible, but there are a couple reasons why experts are like, maybe not. Let's start with the obvious, the distance. The North Island and the South Island are separated by Cook Strait. Like I said, it's 14 miles wide at its narrowest point. That's not much, true. Plus, we've got the HZMB bridge, proving that, yep, it is technically possible to build a bridge over the sea to cover that distance. But we can't ignore the fact that New Zealand's geography is, well, a whole different ballgame. Cook Strait isn't exactly a calm, friendly stretch of water. It's deep, really deep. Parts of it drop to about 10,000 feet. That's like stacking 7 Empire State Buildings on top of each other. It's also a rough, moody stretch of ocean that loves tossing around ships like rubber ducks. In fact, quite a few have been wrecked in Cook Strait. And sadly, many lives were lost. You don't have to worry about it so much though, as the worst accidents happened a long time ago. The ships and ferries that cross it today are much safer. Even so, it'd be pretty hard to avoid getting seasick while crossing it. Things get even messier below the surface. The seafloor over there is uneven and unpredictable. What happens is that Cook Strait has opposing tides at each end, one where it meets the Tasman Sea and the other where it joins the Pacific Ocean. And they simply don't move together like you might expect. When the tide is high on one side, it's low on the other, and they're totally out of sync. So all that water rushes back and forth through the strait to balance things out, creating some really strong and messy currents in the middle. Then there's the weather. Cook Strait isn't just windy, it's probably one of the windiest places in the southern hemisphere. That's because it's located right in the middle of one of New Zealand's 3 big wind tunnels. Basically, there are places where the wind doesn't just come and go quickly. It sticks around, blowing hard for most of the year. And all of this happens because of something called the Roaring Forties. That's the name for the latitude band between 40 and 50 degrees south of the equator, where strong, persistent westerly winds are pretty common. Unlike the northern hemisphere, which has a lot of land at this latitude, the southern hemisphere is mostly ocean with just a few land masses, like New Zealand's South Island, Tasmania, and the southern tip of South America. So, these winds go wild because there's nothing to slow them down, and they just keep picking up speed. The gusts there can reach up to 150 miles per hour. So, imagine trying to cross a bridge in a car when the wind is actively pushing against you. That's not just unpleasant, it's super dangerous. Drivers can easily lose control of their cars with the wind pushing them sideways. And of course, that can lead to countless serious accidents. Now, let's talk about earthquakes. New Zealand sits right on the boundary of 2 massive tectonic plates, the Indo-Australian and Pacific plates. It's basically in the middle of a collision zone. And about 14,000 earthquakes happen in and around the country every year. Of those, only about 200 are big enough to be felt. Still, building a massive bridge under these conditions would require some serious genius-level engineering. With all that in mind, we can safely say that the whole bridge idea is off the table. But how about an underwater tunnel? Yep, that could work. It could be a great solution actually. No wind, no bad weather, and no earthquakes to deal with. There are a bunch of other advantages too. First, it would dramatically reduce travel time, cutting down the 3 to 4 hour sailing trip between the North and South Islands. That same journey would probably only take about 40 minutes. Then people wouldn't have to stress about all the ferry cancellations and delays because of bad weather. And most importantly, it's doable. I mean, look at the Channel Tunnel. It's an undersea tunnel connecting southern England and northern France. Japan did something similar with the Seikan Tunnel, which connects the islands of Honshu and Hokkaido. They are both huge projects, serving pretty much the same purpose. So why on earth isn't New Zealand already building this tunnel? Well, for the same reason we don't all live in luxury treehouses with personal robots: money. Estimates vary, but some experts think a project like this could cost anywhere from $10 to $20 billion. To cover that kind of cost, they'd probably need to charge tolls for the next 100 years. And trust me, those tolls wouldn't be cheap. Other experts think it could actually cost more than that. Because you see, we have to consider all the extra infrastructure. The narrowest point of Cook Strait is between the North Island and Arapawa Island. That's one of the long, mountainous regions in the Marlborough Sounds, which is pretty remote. So it's not just about the cost of the bridge or tunnel itself, it's also the access roads, safety systems, maintenance, and evacuation plans. You can't just build a huge underwater tunnel and not plan for the occasional emergencies. And what would it actually be used for? Sure, there are people who travel between the islands. About 1 million passengers take the ferry every year. But that's not exactly the kind of traffic that justifies the most expensive infrastructure project in the country's history. Earlier, we talked about how England and Japan have similar underwater tunnels. But there's something to consider. The United Kingdom has a population of 69 million. Japan has even more, with around 123 million people. And in New Zealand, they've only got 5 million residents to pay for this project. So could they have a tunnel under Cook Strait? Sure they could. Should they? Probably not. If you don't want to fly, the only other way to travel between the islands is by ferry. It's not ideal, but hey, it works. New Zealand has a total of 5 ships that transport people and vehicles across the islands. For tourists who aren't in a rush, it's perfect. You can cross the islands while taking in some of the most stunning views and spotting amazing wildlife. You'll start your trip in Wellington, and right from there, you'll see the rugged North Island coastline as you head out into open water. You might see different seabirds like gulls and terns, and as you get closer to the South Island, you might spot some gannets. If you're lucky, you could also catch a glimpse of the seal colonies off the coast. During the last hour of the trip, the ferry will slow down, giving you plenty of time to enjoy the green hills and calm waters. You will also approach Queen Charlotte Sound, a spot known for its wildlife. So keep an eye out for orcas, playful dolphins, and even penguins. Honestly, having a ferry instead of a tunnel might not be so bad after all.
So look at this narrow passage between the north of Morocco and the southern part of the Spanish region. It's called the Strait of Gibraltar. There are only 8 miles between the two continents, but for some reason, there's no bridge, despite people having been dreaming for centuries about connecting these two regions. There are places in the world where a bridge over water stretches for a much greater distance. For example, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway near New Orleans, Louisiana, goes for 24 miles, which is 3 times the length of the hypothetical bridge between Africa and Europe. That's listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest continuous bridge passing over water. It consists of 2 parallel bridges and connects the urban area of New Orleans with small settlements in the north of Lake Pontchartrain. 9,000 concrete piles hold more than 1,000 decks above the water. This large-scale structure was built in the middle of the 20th century. It only took 14 months from the start of construction to its completion. American engineers created a unique technology for attaching concrete piles to the base of the bridge, and this bridge is still functioning. So, what's the problem with building a shorter bridge to connect Africa and Europe? Let's first find out the value of the 8-mile bridge that could connect 2 continents and the reason why everyone is talking about it. In fact, the value of such a bridge would be enormous. Diamonds, oil, minerals. Africa is full of valuable materials, and Europe is happy to buy these things. This theoretical bridge could allow people to transport things for trade quickly and comfortably. But now, the exchange of goods between Africa and Europe is only possible thanks to airplanes and cargo ships, and airplanes are extremely expensive because of hefty fuel price tags. In addition, air travel is often delayed because of bad weather. There are long customs procedures and transportation from the airport to the destination. Ships can also be a problem. The narrow area of the Mediterranean Sea, where the two continents are closest to each other, is a dangerous place because of storms and strong currents. The transportation of your diamonds is highly dependent on weather conditions. The second advantage of such a bridge would be the creation of tens of thousands of jobs. People from Europe and Africa would build hotels, ports, parks, and even small towns for each other. The coastal parts of both continents would become a new economic center. And just imagine how much investment those places would attract. Europe and Africa would be much closer than ever before. You could drive from a small Spanish town to a safari park in northern Morocco, buy Moroccan tea, get some argan oil, and go home for the evening. Or you could take a high-speed train across the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. People would open hundreds of restaurants, amusement parks, shopping malls, and a museum next to this bridge. But, unfortunately, it's impossible to build such a bridge, at least at the moment. And here's why. The main problem is the Strait of Gibraltar itself, because of its strong currents and seismic activity. How can you start large-scale construction if, in a couple of days, an underwater earthquake can trigger giant waves and take all the ships underwater? Even if you build a bridge, rapid streams of water that constantly change direction can shake the entire structure and tear the connecting parts of the construction. The bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar must have a strong, sturdy system that will withstand seismic activity. Huge resources are required to create such a complex structure. Despite the dangerous passage between the two continents, it remains one of the busiest points in the world. It's the only place on the planet connecting the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. About 300 ships pass through this area every day. Not only merchant ships, but also fishing vessels and tourist boats. There are not so many places in the world where you can watch whales coming out of the water. Not only people, but also marine creatures often visit this passage because of the peculiarities of the sea currents. But we'll talk about that later. Another problem is the depth of the strait. In simple words, any bridge over the water is built on long metal piles. Builders and engineers stick piles into the seabed and use them as a holding base for the whole construction. But installing such piles firmly enough is a difficult task because of the uneven seabed. The seabed has a unique geological landscape, irregularities, and different densities of the Earth's rock. There are also reefs, rocks, and pits. Any seabed requires extensive geological studies before piles are installed. However, the bottom of the Strait of Gibraltar is especially difficult because of its depth, almost 3,000 feet. It's one of the deepest straits in the whole world. Just imagine, you'll need the height of 10 Statues of Liberty to reach the surface of the water from the bottom of the strait. What kind of pile should be used there to hold the entire bridge? Most likely, one pile will have to consist of several parts connected into one large metal rod. And don't forget about seismic activity. Let's say you've installed perfectly strong piles, but the next day an earthquake occurs and destroys the entire structure. And a strong current is carrying fortifications all over the Mediterranean Sea. The next problem is probably the most important one, because it concerns marine life. The Strait of Gibraltar has a high salt content. This natural element makes water heavier and makes it descend to the bottom of the deep Mediterranean basin. Then, this salt water pushes up cold water from the seabed into the Atlantic Ocean. These changes in water density, as well as fast currents, create sea vortices and turbulence. It's like a raging cauldron of cold water that raises a lot of nutrients to the surface. The hollows and hills of the Strait of Gibraltar are filled with different substances and sunlight, and this creates ideal conditions for the formation of phytoplankton. Whales, dolphins, and other marine creatures adore this delicacy. That's why you can see about 7 species of whales and dolphins in this place. What might happen to phytoplankton after the start of global construction? Carbon dioxide, crushed rock, tons of dust and ashes, falling building materials – all of this could significantly pollute the environment. Without phytoplankton, many fish would go extinct. Without fish, thousands of fishers wouldn't be able to get food and earn money. But even if the bridge was built, cars and trains would continue to pollute the air and water. This disruption of the delicate balance in this narrow strait can lead to larger-scale environmental disasters. Dolphins and whales may leave to look for food elsewhere, and thus take resources from other marine inhabitants. Like falling dominoes, one problem can follow another. And all this because of one bridge. In 2007, the Spanish Ministry of Environmental Protection introduced speed limits for all ships sailing through the strait in order to not disrupt the delicate balance of nature. At the beginning of the 20th century, a French engineer proposed a project of a bridge, but it was rejected because it was too complicated and costly. People also tried to develop a 23-mile-long tunnel, but this project also faced financial and technical difficulties. People are still dreaming of a bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar. Perhaps, in the future, when we develop cooler technologies, we'll be able to build this thing. Oh, by the way, there hasn't always been water between these two regions. In the distant past, the two continents were connected. The entire Mediterranean Sea is the remains of the Tethys Sea that existed before the era of dinosaurs. Then the African and Indian plates collided with the Eurasian one, and the Tethys Sea completely disappeared. In its place, a land bridge was formed that separated the Mediterranean Sea from the ocean. Without access to water, the sea dried up about 6 million years ago. But then, when the bridge came down, the water began to fill the dried-up pool. For tens of thousands of years, the narrow plate sank lower and lower, and the Mediterranean Sea eventually got its current water levels.
This is Australia. And here, a little to the south, is its island part called Tasmania. It's a giant island with beautiful and rich nature, great weather, and delicious food. But for some reason, very few people live here. Something makes people leave this place. Something prevents people from moving here. And this something is… let's find out. So, the population of Tasmania is over 500,000 people. That's not a lot. In fact, Tasmania is Australia's smallest state by population. But it's the 26th largest island in the world. Its area is about the size of Ireland or Switzerland. In other states, the area is much smaller, and there are quite a lot of people. For example, over 8 million residents live in New South Wales, more than 7 million in Victoria, and over 5 million in Queensland. Also, mainland Australia is much more likely to endure fires and scorching sun. Tasmania has a fairly cool climate and amazing nature. So, what's the reason? Why do so few people live here? Let's visit the southeastern part of Tasmania, where the Tasman Peninsula is located. If you look at the map, you'll see that there's the Tasman Sea connected to the boundless Pacific Ocean. So it looks like the Port Arthur we're going to visit is on the edge of the world. In the past, there was Tasmania's official prison here that opened in 1830. Prisoners served their sentences and worked at a logging station. It was hard work, and many could not survive it. It's scary to imagine what happened inside the walls of this prison and how many people stayed there forever. But think for yourself. The Tasman Peninsula is on the edge of the world. There's almost nothing here except wild nature. Prisoners arrived there on ships and spent long hours doing hard work. There was no air conditioning or a soft bed. There was no hope of getting out of there. Some guards treated them cruelly. They were starving. Some got bitten by venomous snakes. There was nowhere to escape. The prison closed in 1877, but even today, it still inspires horror among tourists. Not only because of its appearance and history, but also because of the strange phenomena that occur there. According to rumors and legends, the spirits of prisoners roamed the territory of Port Arthur. And on Monday morning, you can hear bells ring in an old ruined church building. But the thing is, the bells haven't been there for a long time. Of course, those are all rumors, and there are no confirmed facts, but you might feel uncomfortable in this place because of its sinister past and creepy atmosphere. Port Arthur is one of the most mysterious places in Tasmania, but there's something worse. Welcome to Franklin House. It's a large estate with gardens and a huge building. There's a chance that as soon as you cross the threshold of this house, you will want to leave immediately. There are a lot of antiques here, but there's also something elusive and sinister in the air. This house was built by a former convict. 4 years after the construction, he leased the mansion to a schoolteacher who turned it into an academy for boys. It's not known what happened in the walls of this building in the past, but today, according to rumors, mysterious phenomena take place here. Objects move by themselves. Eerie noises come from empty rooms, and shadows of human figures are spotted in halls. Plus, according to a non-profit company that researches mysterious phenomena, there's an increased level of electromagnetic activity in this house. What does it mean? Nature? Weather? Or phantoms? Choose for yourself what to believe in. Okay, there are 2 creepy places in Tasmania, but the reason why people leave this place is different. We're getting closer and closer to it. Hobart is the capital of Tasmania, and there's an old prison here, where people still run tours. Tourists come here to tickle their nerves, because the most terrible sentences were carried out here. There are rumors about strange smells, flickering shadows, and a creepy atmosphere that make this place scary. Yes, if you're a tourist and come here for fun, you will get an interesting experience. But if you're a local and live nearby, then maybe it might bother you. But of course, an abandoned old prison wouldn't discourage people from living on a giant, picturesque island. There's a bigger reason. There's a city in Tasmania called Richmond. According to local legends, once upon a time, George Grover lived here. He was a security guard who kept order during the construction of the Richmond Bridge, which was built by convicts. George Grover was an evil man who treated prisoners cruelly. One day, the prisoners decided to take revenge on him and pushed him off the bridge. Since then, rumors have been circulating that the spirit of George Grover is walking under the bridge with his big black and white dog, which is called Grover's dog. Tourists and locals reported they had seen this evil security guard at night. He didn't harm them, but gave a severe fright. Many terrible events related to escaped prisoners also took place on the island, so judging by the history of Tasmania, there's been a lot of pain and misery here. Perhaps this affects the overall energy of the island. But is this the reason why so few people come to live here? Now we'll finally learn the most terrifying explanation. Are you ready? Please get away from the screens if you're faint of heart. There's almost no internet connection in some parts of the island. Boo! The signal is very weak and unreliable, which makes it impossible for people to work remotely and watch our videos. Besides, Tasmania is separated from Australia by the Bass Strait, which creates logistical difficulties for trade and traveling. Today in 2025, would you agree to live on a huge island with bad internet? You will also have to pay more and wait longer for the delivery of any goods. One of the main sources of income is tourism. In addition, rental prices are rising here, especially in central cities. Because of logistical difficulties, prices for food and necessities are rising here. One of the biggest problems is waiting lists in public hospitals in Tasmania. People who need modern medical care have to wait a long time for their turn, or they gotta spend tons of money to get to the mainland. Tasmania is getting old. More and more young people are leaving this place. There are no major corporate headquarters on the island. There are no large enterprises here like in Sydney and Melbourne, which means there are few career opportunities. Low salaries and unemployment are forcing young people to move to the mainland. The falling standard of living creates serious demographic problems. On the one hand, this is bad. The fewer people there are, the more difficult it is to raise the economy. to run agriculture and somehow improve this region. But on the other hand, it's good for nature. About 24% of Tasmania's land area is a World Heritage Site. This territory is one of the last in the world to have cool rainforests. It's also home to one of the richest archaeological sites in Australia. Scientists found evidence that people lived here at least 20,000 years ago. Of course, these factors are not as creepy as the stories about haunted houses, but they can scare you away from moving to Tasmania. The idea that you live almost on the edge of the world, surrounded by the endless waters of the ocean, can be scary. You can meet unique animals that don't live anywhere else in the world and see incredible trees. For example, the Centurion tree, which is eucalyptus, is one of the tallest and oldest trees in the world. Its height is about 330 feet, and its age is about 400 years. The nature of Tasmania is incredibly beautiful. There's so much peace and calm here. In a sense, it's a paradise. But let's be honest, would you agree to live here considering all the nuances? Let's hope that people will find ways to improve the economy and raise the standard of living so young people won't leave this region. Northern Australia is basically the perfect spot. It's right next to some of the world's busiest trade routes that move trillions of dollars worth of goods every year. With all that action going on, you'd naturally think this massive coastline would be packed with skyscrapers, shopping malls, and sprawling suburbs. But instead, the whole region is practically empty. So why is that? Okay, before you rush to the comments and type, "That's not true," let's clear one thing up. Yes, there are some important cities up north, places like Darwin, with around 150,000 people, or Townsville, which has about 200,000. But let's be real, it's a bit of a stretch to call them major cities. Large metropolitan areas are generally considered places with a population of 1.5 million people or more, like Sydney, Melbourne, or Perth. Now take a look at them. Can you see what all those cities have in common? Yep, they're located in the southern part of the country. The thing is, Australia is massive, stretching across a little under 3 million square miles, making up about 5% of the world's total land area. To put that into perspective, you could fit almost 60 Englands inside Australia's borders. But it's also one of the most sparsely populated countries on Earth. See these red zones here? That's where the majority of people live. This means that the center of Australia is, well, practically empty. That's basically because this area has an intense climate covered with semi-arid and desert regions. It's really dry most of the time and hardly gets any rain, so they end up facing big challenges when it comes to having enough water. During summer days, average temperatures are typically between 98 and 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and suddenly, living by the beach starts to sound a whole lot more appealing. Looking for more bearable temperatures is one of the reasons why most Australians are concentrated along the coastlines. Great, but think about it. Australia is totally surrounded by ocean waters. Yet, for some reason, people choose the southern coastlines, not the north. And that doesn't make much sense. Take a closer look at Darwin, and you'll see that it's actually closer to Indonesia than it is to Australia's own capital. We're talking about the world's fourth most populous nation with one of the fastest growing economies. Indonesia has a ton of positive ingredients behind that growth. It's rich in mineral reserves, has a large working age population, and is becoming strong in sectors like manufacturing, trade, and digital services. Put all that in a blender, and Indonesia's economy is expected to grow at an average annual rate of 4.8% over the next 2 years. In fact, experts believe that Indonesia, and Southeast Asia in general, will be some of the most important countries for Australia over the next 100 years, financially speaking. So that brings us back to the question: why hasn't the northern part of the country turned into a booming metropolis, soaking up the benefits of its prime spot near Asia? Well, there are a couple reasons for that. First up, the weather. The top of Australia has a tropical climate, and that means two things: it's hot and humid. During the wet season, it rains a lot, and I mean a lot. The region suddenly gets hit by big, intense storms. And yeah, thunderstorms can put on a heck of a visual show, but the situation can also get pretty tense. Because when it rains that much, it also floods, sometimes badly. And that can lead to roads being closed and towns getting completely cut off. As a result, producers have a hard time distributing their goods, and stores sometimes end up with empty shelves. It's like a domino effect. The afternoons feel super sticky, with the air so humid it feels like you're walking around wrapped in a warm, wet blanket. During the wet season, the humidity often stays above 70%. But sweat isn't the only problem. The real issue is that all the heat and dampness cause infrastructure to wear out a lot faster. The wet season also means it's a tropical cyclone season. Cyclones can stick around for days or even weeks and often follow messy, unpredictable paths. They're dangerous and bring all kinds of hazards, like extreme winds, heavy rainfall, and storm surges. Then, a few months later, comes the dry season. Humidity takes a break, and there's very little rain. But that means the same wetlands dry up and vanish under the scorching sun, leaving cracked earth behind. That leads to dust, fire risks, and water shortages. This kind of wild weather might work out fine for small towns or a few businesses, but it's a real problem if you want to develop a big city. Major cities need reliable infrastructure and steady access to water and energy, and the North doesn't provide any of that easily. Maintaining a modern city up there would cost a fortune, without a big local population to help pay for it. Mining companies do operate in the North, extracting minerals, gas, and other resources. But they don't build cities, they build temporary towns. Workers fly in for a few weeks, then fly back home. There is money in the North, but it doesn't translate into busy centers. Alright, so here's the second reason why there aren't any big cities up north. The place is super remote. Sure, it is closer to Asia, but that's a whole other continent. When it comes to Australia's own big cities like Sydney or Melbourne, it's really far away. The problem is that the North has always been lacking good roads and railways, and that's related to how things played out in Australia's history. Some would say it's kind of a too little too late situation. Because, you see, back when Britain first settled Australia in 1788, they made practical choices. Over the years, settlers picked spots with safe harbors, manageable weather, and fertile soil. All things the northern coast just didn't have. Early attempts to build towns up north like Port Essington and Fort Wellington failed spectacularly because of disease, isolation, and harsh conditions. Only Darwin managed to survive, but like I mentioned earlier, it never grew into a major city. But none of this means the region was empty before Europeans arrived. And that brings us to reason number 3, protected areas. The North has long been home to diverse Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, groups who were living there thousands of years before Britain showed up. Over the years, many areas have stayed under traditional ownership or have remained really significant and important to Indigenous communities. Even today, big parts of northern Australia are Indigenous lands, national parks, or conservation zones. These lands are protected by law, so developing these areas means navigating complex legal agreements and risking damage to places of enormous cultural and spiritual significance. In other words, it's not exactly easy to just come in and say, "Hey, let's build a big metropolis right here." But it's not like the idea hasn't crossed people's minds. Experts have come up with plans every now and then to open up the North. Many of those plans have ended up failing, mostly because of all the reasons I've already talked about in this video. Even in 2025, the North's remoteness is still a problem, but that doesn't mean it can't be developed. And right now, there's fresh buzz around that old dream, with the Northern Australia Action Plan working to crack the code. Authorities are pouring billions into roads, ports, and infrastructure, hoping to spark industries like clean energy, minerals, and agriculture. all while working closely with indigenous communities who call the North home. It's a bold vision, sure, but it just might finally turn this vast, wild region into a thriving frontier. For now, though, we just have to accept that the North remains mostly wild, full of intense storms, breathtaking landscapes, and unique animals you can't find anywhere else.
The Pacific Ocean stretches for more than 12,000 miles at its widest point. The distance is so great that you could fit 5 moons within this space. And the surface of the Pacific Ocean could fit all 7 continents. It's also greater than the surface of Mars. No wonder, the largest ocean on Earth covers 30% of the planet's surface. Like us humans, most sharks need a winter vacation. In 2002, scientists discovered the White Shark Cafe. That's how they called a remote part of the Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and Baja California. Coastal great white sharks migrate there in the winter. They spend several months there. The animals don't return home until coastal waters get warmer again. During the Stone Age, the entire population of Central Europe was around 1,500 people, which means they would all fit on a mid-sized cruise liner these days. Astronomers have figured out that the Milky Way weighs around 1.5 trillion solar masses, and one solar mass is the mass of our Sun. A tiny part of this weight is a supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy, 4 million solar masses, and 200 billion stars. The rest is dark matter, mysterious and invisible. The platypus is a weird creature, a mammal, but with a duck-like bill, webbed feet, and a flat tail. Female platypuses lay eggs, and males have venomous claws on their hind legs. But the most bizarre thing, these creatures have no stomach. In other words, they don't have a special sac that produces digestive enzymes and acids. Scientists have discovered that some dinosaurs didn't roar. Instead, they produced sounds similar to a duck quacking and a pigeon cooing. One of the most mysterious sounds ever heard on Earth was the bloop. When it occurred in 1997, underwater microphones recorded it from a distance of 3,000 miles away. It resembled the noise of marine animals, but the volume was too great for a sound produced by a living creature. The bloop continued for 1 minute. It started from a low rumble and then rose in frequency. Experts claim that the smell of green apples makes rooms feel larger than they really are, and warm scents in a store, like cinnamon or vanilla, will make you spend more money than you planned. The longest mountain chain on our planet is actually underwater in the Atlantic Ocean. The mid-ocean ridge stretches for more than 40,000 miles. That's 5 times the diameter of Earth. You can't sneeze while sleeping. Your brain simply shuts down this reflex. If something like dust or animal hair triggers the need to sneeze, you have to wake up first. Luckily, you can easily fall back asleep after that. The longest TV ad ever was put together and shown in Brazil in 2018. It was made up of hundreds of short clips. The ad continued for 14 hours and even got to the Guinness World Records. It's also supposed to run online forever. If all sheets of Arctic ice and glaciers melted at the same time, the sea level would rise to the height of a 26-story building. Under black or UV light, ripening bananas look bright blue. That's because of the chlorophyll that's breaking down when the fruit is ripening. After befriending humans, dogs developed 2 muscles above their eyes that weren't there before. It helps pooches maintain better eye contact with their owners and makes their face more expressive. Those big puppy dog eyes that scream, "Adopt me!" Yep, that's the relatively new muscles in action. Because of tectonic plate movements, the Pacific Ocean shrinks by 1 inch every year, and the Atlantic Ocean gets bigger by the same amount. The gap between responses in a conversation usually lasts about 200 milliseconds. Experts say it's the smallest human response time. Sea otters have the densest fur of any animal on our planet. These creatures have more than 1 million hairs per square inch of their bodies. Plus, their fur has 2 layers. There's a shorter undercoat and a guard coat, which is longer. These two layers trap air twice as effectively. It prevents water from getting on the animal's skin. The water temperature doesn't usually rise above 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the deepest parts of the ocean, unless you get close to a hydrothermal vent. The water released by such vents can be heated up to 750 degrees Fahrenheit. Only immense pressure at the ocean floor keeps it from boiling. The Empire State Building's tower was designed to serve as a docking station for dirigibles. At that time, people believed these airships would become the main means of transportation in the future. The project included gangplanks, check-in and customs offices, and so on. But then, the engineers realized the wind up there was too strong for their plans, so they gave up on their idea. These days, there are only 2 ice sheets in the world left after the planet's last ice age. The first is the Greenland ice sheet. The second, the Antarctic ice sheet, is enormous. Clocking in at more than 5 million square miles, it's the size of Mexico and the continental US combined. Angel Falls, the largest uninterrupted waterfall on the planet, is more than twice as tall as the Empire State Building. During the dry season, the falling water sometimes evaporates before it reaches the ground. Tsunami waves often go unnoticed. They don't rise for more than several inches above the surface until they reach shallow waters. When the ocean is deep, though, these stealthy waves can travel at a speed of 500 miles per hour. That's as fast as a long-distance passenger airplane. Actors' brains work differently every time they're in character. Psychologists say it looks as if they're suppressing their own personalities while acting. It's as if their characters possess them. Corals that live in shallow waters produce their own protection from the sun. Without it, sunlight would harm the algae living inside them. To protect these algae, which are the main sources of food for the corals, they fluoresce. This process makes proteins that act like sunscreen. Facebook was once experimenting with artificial intelligence and created 2 AI chatbots. They could talk to each other, but the experiment had to be shut down. The bots started to communicate in a language no one but them understood. Experts have a better explanation than a robot uprising, though. They're sure the networks were just trying to improve the human language to interact more effectively. The Milky Way galaxy, which is our home galaxy, is more than 100,000 light-years across, and 1 light-year is the distance light travels in a year, moving at a speed of more than 186,000 miles per second. Almost 90% of all the volcanic activity on Earth happens in the oceans. The South Pacific has the largest concentration of volcanoes people know about. There's one volcano cluster that has 1,133 volcanic cones. All of them are active and cooped up in an area the size of New York State. When you arrive at a new place while traveling, your brain can't relax. It's called the first night effect. One side of your brain remains alert, because what if there's some danger lurking in this new environment? It's usually the left side of the brain that's more awake when you spend your first night in an unfamiliar place. Scientists believe the way people speak was once changed by our diets. When our ancestors started to eat softer foods, like vegetables and grains, their teeth and jaws changed. That's why people started to use softer sounds, like V and F. The Jemchug Canyon in the middle of the Bering Sea is the largest underwater canyon ever discovered, and it's 2,500 feet deeper than the Grand Canyon. When you lose weight, your fat cells don't disappear, they just become smaller. But when you put on some extra pounds, your fat cells grow both in size and in number. One mouse species living in the forests of Central America can boast an incredible musical repertoire. These tiny creatures reply to each other with the help of almost 100 notes. When you snap your fingers, it's not your thumb that produces the sound. What you hear is your middle finger hitting against your palm. Cows don't like it when they have to stay away from their best friends. These animals have strong social bonds and make BFFs. When their close friends are away, cows even show physical symptoms of stress. There are more treasures and artifacts at the bottom of the ocean than in all museums in the world combined. Bug sprays don't actually repel mosquitoes. They just mask your smell and create a barrier so that bugs can't detect the carbon dioxide and lactic acid they're attracted to.
Name a desert. Let me guess. Sahara? Well, actually, no matter which one you thought of, I'm sure of one thing. It's located somewhere below this line. See, when we hear the word deserts, we usually picture dry, sandy, blazing hot places, and there's not a single one of those above 45 degrees north latitude, or below 45 degrees south. In the south, that kind of makes sense. I mean, if you leave out Antarctica, there's not a whole lot of land down there. But things are different above 45 degrees north. There are tons of land. Countries like Canada, France, the United Kingdom, and a bunch of others. And still, not a single desert. Actually, not a hot desert. Most of the major hot deserts are up in the northern hemisphere, near the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. And the hottest ones are usually found between 15 and 30 degrees north or south of the equator. Just like the Sahara, where average high temperatures can reach up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Together, hot deserts cover almost 15% of the Earth's land area. But if our planet is packed with them, why doesn't a single one appear above this line? I mean, the 45 degrees north latitude. I'll explain. Let's divide Earth into 5 main zones. The polar regions are located at both ends, north and south. Right here, we have the 2 temperate zones. And finally, right in the middle of the globe is the tropical zone. Now, the line we're talking about sits in the temperate zone, in a colder area. Because the farther you go away from the equator, the colder it gets. Actually, the average annual temperature drops about 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit for every degree of latitude you move north in the northern hemisphere. And cold weather is the main reason hot deserts don't form above this line. It turns out that as you move farther north from the equator, the sun's rays hit the Earth at a more slanted angle. That spreads the solar energy over a larger area, which means less heat is concentrated in one spot. Basically, these regions just don't get as hot. And it's one of the reasons why countries like Finland are much colder than Colombia, for example. Another reason temperatures are lower in this zone has to do with something called albedo. Basically, this term refers to the amount of sunlight that a surface reflects back. Let me give you an example. Every surface on Earth both reflects and absorbs sunlight, but in different amounts. Take snow, for example. It can reflect up to 90% of the sunlight that hits it and only absorbs about 10%. That's what gives snow a high albedo. And it's totally different with sand, which has a lower albedo. In places like the Kalahari Desert, down in southern Africa, it's about a 50-50 situation. Most of the year, roughly 50% of the sunlight gets reflected around there, and the other 50% is absorbed. The heat absorbed by the sand is part of why it gets so hot in dry places like deserts. I mean, hot deserts. Simply put, sand soaks up more heat, while snow reflects most of it. This is one of the reasons why snowy areas stay much cooler. So the closer you get to the polar zones, the easier it is for sunlight to be reflected instead of absorbed. And that helps explain why there aren't any hot deserts around those parts. Then, we also have atmospheric patterns. Let's just say that the air patterns change a lot once you go above that 45-degree line. That's because this region is controlled by a wind belt known as the Ferrel Cell. Okay, so Earth has 3 main convection cells. You can think of them as big loops of moving air. Warm air rises, cools down, sinks, and then the cycle repeats. At the top and bottom of the planet, we have the polar cells. Right in the middle are the Hadley cells, and sandwiched between those two are the Ferrel cells. Now, everything that happens between these 3 cells can get a little complicated, but for today, the main thing to know is this. In those middle zones, the warm air that comes from the tropics meets the cold air from the polar regions. So, ferrule cells play a big role in moving heat from the equator up toward the poles. This flow of warm air helps smooth out the temperature differences between the tropics and the polar regions. And that's what shapes the weather in places like North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. In the mid-latitudes, the ferrule cell keeps the air moving around so much that hot, dry air doesn't really get a chance to settle. So, those regions end up with more moisture, more clouds, and even storms, rather than dry, desert-like weather. That's why you don't usually see hot deserts around 45 degrees latitude. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the ferrule cell makes the weather less stable. And that's very different from what happens in the Sahara Desert, for example. Over there, temperatures don't change all that much throughout the year. Just expect it to be hot. When you put all these factors together, it helps explain why hot deserts are mostly limited to the middle parts of the Earth, and why you'll never find a Sahara or Kalahari-style desert in places like Canada or Sweden. But that doesn't mean we don't have any deserts above the 45-degree line. Turns out, deserts don't always have to be hot and sandy. In fact, they can look like this. Yep, I'm talking about the Arctic. Because the actual definition of a desert isn't just some hot, dry, sandy place, it's really any area that gets very little precipitation. In other words, an area where it doesn't rain much. And it usually gets no more than 10 inches of precipitation per year. So no matter if the weather is hot or cold, deserts are really dry places with hardly any vegetation around. That makes it pretty tough for animals and plants to live in those environments. If you think about it, that means the biggest desert on Earth is Antarctica. It covers about 5.5 million square miles, just endless ice flats as far as the eye can see. It's also the coldest desert on the planet, even colder than the Arctic, which is the other polar desert. Temperatures there can drop as low as minus 128.2 degrees Fahrenheit. If you look at the Earth, about 33% of its land is desert. Now, pay close attention to the ones located between 15 and 30 degrees latitude. These are called tropical deserts. But can you notice something curious about their locations? Most of them are found on the western edges of continents. And there's a reason for that. Actually, 4 main reasons. First, the winds that bring rain usually blow from the east. When they move across the land, they drop most of the rain early on. By the time these winds reach the west side, they're dry, so there's no rain left for those areas. That already makes things pretty dry. Second, in the western margins of continents, the air usually goes down instead of up. When air goes down, it gets warmer and can't form clouds, so again, no rain. Third, if there are mountains nearby, they can block the rain too. One side of the mountain gets all the moisture, and the other side, called the rain shadow, stays dry. And lastly, the ocean near these places often has cold water. Cold water cools the air above it and makes it calm, so clouds don't form easily. No clouds means no rain. So when you put all of that together, it helps explain why those tropical deserts seem to prefer one side of the continent more than the other.
See how the Antarctic Peninsula looks just like South America, but upside down? This isn't just a coincidence. It's the ghost of a 30-million-year-old breakup. These continents were once connected, but their divorce gave birth to an ocean current so powerful, it was capable of completely freezing Antarctica and shaping its landscape. Here's how it went down. Tectonic plates pulled a sneaky move and cracked open a ridiculously narrow passage in the ocean, about only 500 miles wide, forcing 4.5 trillion cubic feet of water to flow inside this geological straw. This was the birth of an ocean current stronger than the Amazon River. This ocean current, called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, by the way, flows in a circular motion, going clockwise because of the strong winds that blow over there. This circular motion around Antarctica caused erosion, shaping the landmass of the continent into a circle, except for that stubborn peninsula, which is being slowly dragged east like a kid refusing to leave a playground. Wait, South America and Antarctica used to be one? Yep, a long time ago. South America, Australia, and Antarctica were all part of a supercontinent called Gondwana, which also included Africa at some point. Back then, South America and Antarctica used to be basically joined at the hip by a land bridge called the Antarctic Land Bridge, which just so happened to be a lush green forest and also a great dinosaur highway. Yeah, you heard it right. Dinosaurs. A 95-million-year-old dino, whose name I can't pronounce, sorry, was discovered in Australia, and scientists found out it had actually been a distant cousin of Argentina's Sarmientosaurus. Same jaw, same chiseled teeth, same everything. These guys were like identical twins, separated by an ocean. How? Because back then, Antarctica wasn't a frozen wasteland. It was a temperate rainforest, like Oregon, making it a pretty nice travel route for a dino family. But the land bridge wasn't just for dinosaurs. About 40 million years ago, the ancestors of Australia's marsupials waddled to the land down under all the way from South America, taking the Antarctica route, another proof that these continents used to be connected. Things remained somewhat peaceful for the dinos and the marsupials until Earth's ground started moving. This is what a German scientist called the continental drift theory, back in 1912. Our German friend here basically looked at the coast of South America and went, "Hey, this looks like it could fit into the coast of Africa." Like a scientific Sherlock Holmes, he noticed what others had overlooked for centuries. The continents were clearly pieces of a larger puzzle. And he was right. Here's the deal. Planet Earth is made of many layers of rocks and metals, like a cosmic onion. The outermost layer, the lithosphere, is divided into pretty solid tectonic plates that move atop a layer of softer, somewhat molten rocks, like slippery ice. This is why the plates move. In fact, they've been rearranging Earth's face for billions of years, with supercontinents forming and breaking apart in cycles, like a slow-motion game of bumper cars. This movement might be pretty slow since most tectonic plates only move 0 to 3.9 inches every year, except for the Nazca plate, racing ahead at 7.8 inches, about as fast as your hair grows. But don't let their snail's pace fool you. These shifting slabs are the ultimate planet shapers. Their slow dance gives us everything from earthquakes that build mountains, like the Himalayas, to rifts that birth oceans, like the Atlantic. All because the oceanic crust is dense and sinks like a stone, while continental crust floats like a cork. It's this density difference that explains why continents exist at all. Without it, Earth would be completely covered by shallow seas. This slow-motion planetary renovation project is exactly what tore South America and Antarctica apart 30 million years ago. The plates under these continents started to drift apart in a process called crustal extension. It's like the lithosphere was pizza dough being slowly stretched until it thins and splits. As the crust stretched, it became thinner and weaker, eventually cracking like the surface of a drying lake bed. This whole thing gave birth to a new tectonic plate, the Scotia Plate, that emerged between South America and Antarctica, like a geological divorce lawyer. For a while, parts of this plate stayed above water as the last gasp of the Antarctic land bridge. It was Earth's version of that one thread still connecting your hoodie after the zipper breaks. These final connections might have persisted as chains of islands, but just like that fraying hoodie, the connection couldn't last forever. Eventually, this small but mighty plate became the final nail in the coffin of the land bridge connecting the two continents. Just like all the tectonic plates, this one was also on the move. As it expanded eastward, it opened a new passage of water called the Drake Passage, slowly covering the Antarctic land bridge with ocean water. The process was like pulling open elevator doors. At first, just a crack, then wider and wider until the connection was completely broken. This geographical divorce had chilling consequences. The new Drake Passage allowed the Antarctic circumpolar current to form, creating an endless loop of cold water that isolated Antarctica, shaped its land, and even cooled the entire planet. This current acts like a wall around Antarctica, blocking warm water and invasive species while regulating global climate. Eventually, Antarctica turned into an icebox that is 98% covered in ice sheets, and that holds about 61% of Earth's freshwater. Nowadays, this continent holds the title of the windiest, driest, and iciest place on Earth. It's a frozen desert where temperatures plunge below -128.6 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze your breath mid-air. A layer of ice there can be more than a mile thick, and it expands even further in winter to cover an area larger than the continental United States. Today, if you want to travel to Antarctica, the quickest sea route is through the Drake Passage, a 500-mile-wide body of water that is narrow enough for the winds to scream across thousands of miles, transforming into monstrous waves that can tower up to 49 feet, though calm days create waves only 13 to 16 feet high. Still twice as tall as Atlantic waves, mind you. This is probably why sailors call this stretch of ocean the Drake Shake. But tectonic movement isn't just about shifting continents. It's Earth's ultimate life support system. You see, about half of our planet's heat comes from radioactive decay in the core. Thanks, uranium-235. Something like nature's nuclear reactor. This heat is behind everything from volcanoes to the very plate motion that once connected Antarctica to South America. And it only comes out of the core because of tectonic movement. Without this internal heat engine, Earth would be just like Mars. When the plates move and release heat, they also release CO2 gases into the atmosphere, regulating the temperature of our planet. And when the plates move underwater, they take a lot of this CO2 back to Earth's interior, recycling all this gas. This is why the plates can change our air, climate, and even the evolution of life itself just by moving around. But billions of years ago, these plates were not moving around. Back then, it was like Earth was wearing a solid ceramic shell with many cracks. But even without tectonic movement, the heat managed to escape through these cracks in a process called stagnant lid tectonics, kickstarting all life on Earth. And no, tectonic movement is not a thing of the past. Earthquakes are the living proof that it is not just happening today, but might repeat again on a more dramatic scale in the future. You see, to form supercontinents like Pangaea, smaller megacontinents have to dive beneath another. And scientists predict that a similar process might create a new supercontinent called Pangaea Proxima in 250 million years. By then, humans might be extinct or living on Mars, but Earth's tectonic dance will continue, even without us. Not bad for something that moves more slowly than a traffic jam. Turns out, Antarctica and South America used to be BFFs before all that tectonic drama split them up, like a messy breakup that literally froze one of them out. Now, they just awkwardly mirror each other from across the Drake Passage. Classic exes. Closing the North Sea in a nearly 400-mile-long dam may save Europe from complete disaster. This is not some sci-fi stuff. It's real. And it's called NEED, Northern European Enclosure Dam. It's a last-ditch plan to save over 25 million people from 15 European countries from the rising sea levels. To build this giant bathtub, humans need one dam between England and France, another one between Norway and Scotland, 51 billion tons of sand, and almost 600 billion euros. As crazy as it may sound, this project is totally feasible, except for one teeny tiny detail. The scientists who had this literally life-saving idea don't want the dam to be built. First and foremost, the NEED needs, two dams. One that is 100 miles long and almost 334 feet deep in the English Channel, and another that is 300 miles long and more than 1,000 feet deep in the North Sea. Building something like this requires a crazy amount of materials, like the 51 billion tons of sand we mentioned before, which is basically all the sand everyone on the planet uses in a year. And yes, this dam would obviously be the biggest in history, smashing records like the Netherlands' 19-mile Afsluitdijk and South Korea's 20-mile Saemangam seawall. The NEED Dam would be 19 times bigger than Saemangam. It sounds ridiculous, but it's not impossible. You see, Humans are pretty good at building big stuff. Oil rigs, for example, operate at depths of up to 6,500 feet, and the Need Dam would only go down more than 1,000 feet. Plus, China has a 102-mile-long bridge, and the dam would only be 4 times longer. Besides, projects like this dam were done before for the exact same reason. It's our friend Afsluitdijk in the Netherlands, which was built almost 100 years ago. The idea here was to shut off a part of the North Sea called Zuiderzee and protect the Netherlands from all the flooding because most of the country is below sea level. They even drained one of the lakes formed by the dam and created a whole new province, Flevoland. Today, the Netherlands has more than 2,200 miles of flood protection, but it's only designed for a 15-inch sea level rise. Without it, the country would be underwater. So yeah, we could do it, but it's really expensive. How expensive? Well, it would cost around 550 billion euros if the project is wrapped up in about 20 years. One wrong step and humans can spend 100 years building this dam, and a couple of billion euros more. The good news is that this much money can be diluted over the 20 to 100 years it takes for the dam to get finished. Besides, the 15 countries it would protect could share the expenses, reducing the amount to only 0.1% of the GDP of all the countries. Not a bad deal to save millions of people, right? Okay, but is this monstrosity really necessary? Well, unfortunately, humans have managed to turn the ocean against us. This means that by 2100, the sea levels are expected to have risen between 1 to 2 feet. If we keep acting like it's none of our business, the rise can reach more than 16 feet by 2300. It may sound like a distant future, but NASA has just discovered that the ocean rose way more than they expected in 2024, which means global disaster is breathing down our necks as we speak. Let's go back to our geography classes for a moment and learn why sea levels are rising altogether. First, because land can sink. The city of Norfolk, Virginia, for example, was built inside a massive crater, and the earth there can erode and sink. Then the soil can get compacted. Because of that, the city is literally sinking into the ground, making it more vulnerable to flooding. In California, some areas are sinking too, but this time it's because of the movement of tectonic plates. Some of the land that is underwater goes up, some of the land over the water goes down. The consequences? Again, heavy flooding. Sea levels also rise if the planet gets too hot. This happens because of a thing called thermal expansion. It has a very scientific name, but it basically means that things like water get bigger if the temperature rises. Half of the reason why sea levels are rising is because of this. This is why the level of the ocean increases almost 10 feet every time the average temperature of the planet rises by 33.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Since 1880, the sea has risen more than 8 inches. Okay, so we build the Need Dam and the problem is solved, right? Well, building this dam comes with massive consequences. First, the ocean currents, think of them as underwater highways that deliver nutrients to tiny creatures like planktons, not the SpongeBob villain, and give rides to animals like lizards and tortoises. A dam this big is capable of messing up the ocean currents that bathe Europe, disrupting the food chain not just inside the dam, but outside too. The currents are also responsible for the climate of coastal areas. The Gulf Stream, for example, is a warm current that comes all the way from Mexico and makes the weather in northwestern Europe a bit more bearable. If the Gulf Stream got interrupted by a gigantic oceanic barrier, it could make parts of Europe even colder. Another problem is that the North Sea would turn into a gigantic freshwater lake. This would happen because the salt water that used to flow from the ocean would now be blocked. And the North Sea would only be fed by the fresh water coming from inside the continent. This process would eventually lead to a thing called desalination, when salt water gets less salty. And it's really terrible because saltwater animals would start to absorb more water than they should, making the cells of their bodies swell. The consequences can be fatal. The disruption of the ocean currents by the dam can also affect the renewal of oxygen in the water. Think of the ocean as a giant recycling system. Surface water needs to sink to deliver oxygen to the deep sea, keeping creatures dwelling at the bottom alive. Without the movement of ocean currents, oxygen would run out and toxic bacteria would take over, creating a poisonous environment for sea creatures. And this is not just a theory. It happened before, 250 million years ago. The ocean got so toxic, it wiped out 95% of marine life and caused a mass extinction. If it's not bad enough, the fishing industry would collapse, and the busiest trading ports of Europe like Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Hamburg would be stuck inside the dam. Sure, we could build sluice gates, but imagine all those traffic jams. The rain patterns of the countries protected by the dam would change too, affecting farming lands and food production. On the other hand, if we do nothing about rising sea levels, permanent flooding could make whole countries disappear. 3 million people on the islands of the Pacific would need to move away by the end of the century. The Maldives would lose 77% of its territories, and cities like Jakarta, Bangladesh, and Lagos would go underwater. Storms would get more dangerous too, destroying treatment plants for sewage and power stations and contaminating farmlands. Rising salt water could also contaminate freshwater supplies, and it's not just happening in Asia and Europe. Philadelphia, for example, is already developing plans to deal with this bleak scenario. This is why the scientists who developed this big red button shaped like a dam don't want people to actually build a dam. They know how bad things can get, which is why they came up with a plan so wild it's basically the engineering version of screaming, "Hey, stop ignoring the planet!" It's a warning. If we don't act now, we'll be stuck building mega dams just to keep our cities from becoming Atlantis 2.0. And let's be honest, nobody wants to live in a future where the apocalypse looks like the deep web version of The Little Mermaid.
Now, when you think of Norway, things that come to mind are the sun that never sets in the summer, unbelievable nature, the fact that it's one of the happiest countries in the world, even white bears that freely roam in the wild. I'm guessing they're happy too. Already planning your trip to this dream country? Well, don't rush. You'll have to review your budget. Fuel there is 10 to 15% more expensive than in other Western European countries. A meal at a cafe for one person will cost at least $30. Plus, consider yourself lucky if you manage to find a hotel at $100 a night. If you Google the most expensive country in the world, you'll see this list. Switzerland, which is meanishly expensive. The United States, duh, been there, know that. Luxembourg is not a surprise either. And then, all of a sudden, you see Norway. Just so you know, a family of 4 would need over $4,000 a month just to exist in Norway. And it doesn't even include rent. Specialists say that Norway is around 7% more expensive than in the US. Norway is a bit weird though. Usually, the richest countries have national currencies that are stronger than the US dollar. Take Swiss francs, for example, or the Kuwaiti dinar, which is literally the boss when it comes to currencies. Like one Kuwaiti dinar can snag you $3.25 US. Now, here's where the mismatch comes. The Norwegian krone is dubbed the weakest currency in the West. Well, how come? In the wild world of global currencies, the Norwegian krone used to be a tough player known for smart money moves. But surprisingly, it is now the weakest currency in the West, taking a big hit in the last decade. It has fallen hard against the US dollar and euro, causing concern for central banks and money folks worldwide. The oil price roller coaster is a major factor in the krone's struggle, as Norway relies heavily on oil exports. But even with oil prices relatively high, it remains historically weak against major currencies. The weak Norwegian krone is affecting everyday folks too, with prices rising on almost everything due to heavy imports. Inflation is growing, leading to interest rate hikes by the Norges Bank. High interest rates are hurting the housing market and making life more expensive for Norwegian citizens. So one of the supposed reasons for why Norway is so expensive might be weak national currency. What else is particular about Norway? Well, climate for sure. It may be hard to imagine a freezingly cold country plunging into riches. It's an imagery we usually see on social media with geotags Dubai, Saudi Arabia, or even Kuwait. And it makes sense to think now that all the riches are somewhere southward, as these places have strong oil-based economies and super strong currencies. But in reality, better economies in the south are a current trend. Ever wonder why cold countries seem to be raking in the cash while the hot nations are just hanging out? Turns out, those living in chilly climates had to hustle just to survive winter. Think building shelter, stockpiling food, and keeping that fire burning. Meanwhile, those basking in the sunshine had it a little easier with hunting and foraging year-round. This theory holds true even in the land down under. Sydney and Melbourne, the top dogs in Australia's wealth game, also happen to be some of the coldest cities, while Darwin, the warmest city, is lagging behind. Some might argue that this theory doesn't hold up when we look at ancient civilizations or modern hotspots like tropical Singapore. But hey, times change, and so does wealth generation. Back in the day, it was all about farming, but now it's more about industry and innovation. So, Norway may seem to have been bound to get rich historically and geographically. Still, it's not exactly so. Norway used to struggle a lot. Back in the day, it faced some tough times with harsh winters and tricky geography. They even had famines that pushed families to seek a better life in the US. So, how did Norway go from rags to riches? Yep, oil and gas played a big role. The country is small, but it has around 0.31% of all oil reserves in the world. But in Norway, there's more to the story than just black gold. For example, the top oil reserve is not some Arabic country, but Venezuela, which claims up to 20% of the world's liquid gold. Still, Venezuelans' economy is far from stable, so it's not all about oil. Although bested in forest size by other European nations, Norway was an unrivaled powerhouse in lumber during the Age of Sail. Thanks to its strategic fjord path, timber from its inland forests could quickly reach fjordside mills and global markets. As railroads unlocked larger forest potential in other countries post the 19th century, Norway was Europe's timber king, bolstered by a world-class merchant fleet by the 20th century. The Norwegian timber wealth, coupled with early cooperative societal norms, spurred growth across several sectors, from agriculture to fishing and banking. Despite being labeled poor in the 19th century, Norway's GDP per capita outshone Eastern and Southern European nations. The nation's ascendancy continues beyond the discovery of its oil reserves. Norway is unique, with a small population but sprawling land. Despite its vastness, the Nordics are scattered and considered one of the most spacious countries globally. Much of the North's territory stretches beyond the Arctic Circle, offering harsh landscapes with thin topsoil covering the bedrock. The tough terrain in Norway, full of mountains and with a short growing season, limits arable land to only 2.2%, similar to Yemen. The scattered arable land in small valleys makes extensive farming impractical, a far cry from the efficient farming in the U.S. With a huge chunk of land and coastlines, but a small population, Norway makes some serious cash from its reserves. Plus, nature has been pretty kind to Norway, with rich fishing grounds, hydropower from rivers, and power from cold waters. And only then comes the little thing called oil. The late 50s saw a big discovery that changed everything for Norway's economy. Fast forward to today, and petroleum activities have been a major game changer for Norway, feeding its economic growth and funding its welfare state. But Norway didn't just sit back and watch the money flow in. They made smart moves, like creating a sovereign wealth fund to manage their oil wealth for the long haul. The fund sees some big bucks, currently standing at 1.7 billion Norwegian kroner, or over 160 million US dollars. Norway uses the interest from this fund to boost its annual budget, ensuring top-notch healthcare, education, and welfare for its citizens. And here's the kicker: Norway's not resting on its laurels. They're investing in sustainable technologies, like offshore wind power, to secure a bright future beyond oil and gas. Now, Norway may be expensive, but it can't compete with the world's costliest place to live, Monaco. It's almost 4 times more expensive than the global average. So, if you're looking to rub elbows with the rich and famous, look no further than Monaco. With property prices soaring to an average of over $50,000 per square meter in 2022, it's no wonder why this tiny country is a magnet for the la-di-da. However, there's a place that's particularly expensive for tourists, and I'm not talking about tourist traps. Neither Oslo nor Monaco can beat the prices in, well, take a second to make your guess. Ready? Welcome to Ashgabat, Turkmenistan's capital. A gallon of milk costs a whopping $15, while a standard internet subscription plan will set you back $168 a month. Calm down, you're not poor, it's just an economic glitch. The reason for these prices is simple. The Turkmen national currency exchange rate in relation to dollars is fixed and never changes. $1 equals 3.5 manats, and it's been so since 2015. Local prices in the local currency grew to inflation, making it not proportionate to prices in dollars. The exchange rate never changes. So if you live there, such prices don't seem to be extraordinary. But if you come with dollars, you're in for a pricey trip.
For every 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit increase in a country's average temperature, the GDP per capita drops by at least 1.1%. To put it simply, with every step you take from the North Pole to the equator, not only do you get hotter, but you also get poorer. Even though life in freezing cold countries can seem miserable, 74.2% of the world's billionaires are concentrated in the global north. And there are at least 4 theories explaining that. The simplest theory is tied to biology. Cold weather is believed to keep germs away, leading to better health and productivity. Sounds good, but I'll challenge that later. Next, there's the sloth theory from ancient Greece, and it's more about climate in general. Greeks believed their ideal weather made them wealthier, while hotter regions were seen as less creative. The third idea is based on economic and anthropological studies. You see, experts noticed some time ago that colder countries have inclusive institutions that offer equal job and life opportunities and protect markets and private property. Naturally, such conditions promote healthy competition and boost wealth. The last idea is tightly connected to the previous one. Long story short, richer countries tend to distribute money better because they're more inclusive. Poorer nations often have extractive institutions where a powerful elite controls wealth. While all of them seem plausible, the truth is, these ideas are borderline insane. Well, you know the theory claiming that cold climates eliminates germs and the population of colder countries doesn't get so sick? I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but the cold actually makes germs thrive. In the cold, we tend to stay inside with the whole house shut, so we share germs with each other more easily. Not only that, but during winter, the air is drier, creating the perfect environment for the flu virus to flourish. Humans are also more resistant to viruses and bacteria from their own environment because the constant contact with them makes our immune system stronger. If you look back at your history classes, you might remember that most British people struggled with the weather and bacteria found in America, while Native Americans themselves were mostly fine. And what about the sloth theory? Sorry, I don't mean it to sound offensive, but some specialists, they claim that, people in hotter countries tend to be lazier. But the truth is, the sun doesn't make us work less. Yes, the sun can make you a bit slower because you can dehydrate. But you see, the human body is biologically adapted to the climate of the place they're born in. This means that if you live in Canada, for example, you can endure the cold just fine. But Brazilians will probably handle hot days better than you. But if the sloth theory was true, how would you explain that people in Colombia work about 200 hours a year more than those from the United States? In fact, if you live in Cambodia, Myanmar, or Mexico, you're bound to work more than anyone in the world. Besides, hotter countries have a genius way to fight off laziness. It's called siesta. After lunch, it's normal to feel a bit sleepy, and if you have heavier meals like the Spanish and Italians do, you'll get extra slow. This is why after lunch they usually have a siesta, also known as a quick nap, which improves your memory and thinking skills. It may sound like a siesta makes you work less, but people who nap after lunch simply work at different hours of the day. While you make shorter lunch breaks and go home at 6 p.m., in Spain, the lunch break lasts 2 hours and the workday ends at 8 p.m. They work when it's not so hot outside and even get to take a power nap. The past is also crowded with people who lived rich lives despite the scorching sun. The ancient Egypt civilization may have existed thousands of years ago, but they were one of the richest civilizations ever, even though they lived in a place that was super hot and super dry. We also have the Aztecs, who lived in Mexico back when Mexico didn't exist yet. This region is not so famous for its cold weather, I can tell you that. But the Aztec civilization still managed to have a capital that was bigger than London, Paris, and Madrid of the time. On top of that, many of the inventions we have today that make a lot of people rich were created thanks to math and science. Two things born in hot places, like Mesopotamia and India. Now, to make all those economic and anthropological studies sound simpler, let's start with the most obvious part. It's true that hotter countries usually make money out of their natural resources. They don't have such strong industries, and the money is concentrated in the hands of the elite. All of this reduces the GDP, that thing that estimates whether a country is wealthy or not. Remember we said richer countries have inclusive institutions? These institutions are basically laws that make sure people have equal job and life opportunities, including nice houses and a good salary. Poor countries are not very good at this inclusive institution thing, but it's not by choice. This is actually a consequence of the age of exploration. In case you were sleeping during your history classes, let me remind you. The age of exploration is that time between the 15th and 17th centuries, when many kingdoms in Europe were exploring the seas and setting up colonies all over the world. I know it feels like this was a long time ago, but many countries that were colonies back then only became independent during the 20th and 21st century. This is why many poor countries don't have solid industries and markets, because their institutions and laws date back to when they were still colonies, and their years as colonies depleted resources and didn't provide a good infrastructure. Besides, saying that private property reduces the income and inequality gap is kind of absurd. It's true that developing countries like Brazil and South Africa are highly unequal. But in the US, for example, 1% of the richest people in the country make 139 times more money than the poorest part of the population. And there were more than 700,000 homeless people in 2024. Besides, 1% of the world's population is wealthier than the rest of humankind put together. If inclusive institutions were really that powerful in richer countries, then there wouldn't be more than 1 billion people living in acute poverty all over the world. There's no point in saying that private property makes everyone's lives better if people can't even afford to have a house in the first place. And using the GDP to calculate the wealth of a country is not exactly the best way to understand poverty, because the GDP only considers how much money the industry itself makes. It ignores, for example, the question of whether people who work in those industries have good jobs, if they are well paid and have a good life. The GDP also ignores inequality, which means it ignores those inclusive institutions we mentioned before. In the United States, there are about 835 billionaires, but 11% of the American population is still very poor. So, my hot take here is that inclusive institutions are not that inclusive, and that money is not that well distributed in the first place. Different cultures also have different concepts of what it means to be wealthy. In London, for example, being able to afford food, clothes, and shelter does not make you rich. To them, you're simply surviving. If you want to be truly wealthy in London, you might have to hire a housekeeper, buy a horse, and have a personal Pilates instructor. But to the Awa or the Yanomami tribes, money doesn't even exist. They produce only the necessary, and if they have a surplus, they will trade with other tribes. I guess the fact that poor countries are all located closer to the equator line is not just a simple historical coincidence.
So it turns out that so-called rich countries are facing a big problem. People are not having kids. Not enough at least. On average, women need to have 2 children to keep things balanced, but they're only having 1 or none at all. This issue comes down to the fertility rate, or simply the average number of kids a woman is expected to have in her lifetime. When that number's too low, it means more people are passing away in these countries than being born, and that can destroy the economy. Think of a rich country – the US, Germany, Japan. Great! Pick any wealthy nation you like, and I can promise you one thing – its fertility rate is below 2.1, and that's a problem. Here's why. Meet Mary and John, and over here we've got Jack and Lucy. That's 4 people total. Now, both couples get married. Mary and John have 2 kids, but Jack and Lucy only have 1. Now, what does that mean? Simple math, we're down by 1 person. And if this keeps happening, generation after generation, the population starts to shrink. The situation gets pretty scary when we zoom in on certain countries. Take Spain, Italy, or Poland. These countries have some of the lowest fertility rates in the European Union, with women there having, on average, just 1 kid. And that's a big problem, because it drags down entire economies. Picture a triangle, young people and workers at the bottom and the elderly at the top. In many rich countries, that bottom part is shrinking fast, with fewer babies being born each year. So it's like this triangle is flipping upside down. Fewer young folks and workers, but more and more older people. With fewer workers and more retirees, the economy struggles to stay balanced. It's like the domino effect. Fewer people working means fewer people paying taxes. Meanwhile, the older population at the top keeps growing. And now we have a way bigger group depending on pensions and stuff like Social Security. So we're left asking, who's going to pay for all these retirements? Now, some countries are in hotter water than others, and South Korea is really feeling the heat. They've got more and more people getting older, while fewer and fewer babies are being born. In fact, they've got the lowest fertility rate in the world. In 2023, it hit rock bottom, 0.72 births per woman. Now, personally, I don't know how you can have 3/4 of a kid, but hey, that's statistics for you. Meanwhile, if things keep going like this, Korea's population could shrink by half by 2100. Over the last 20 years, their authorities have invested in the equivalent of $286 billion in this issue, and they've rolled out a bunch of incentives to turn things around. First up, pocket money. If a married couple in Korea decides to have their first kid, the government hands over about $10,000 split into monthly payments to help out. While that might sound impressive, it's only about 3 times the average monthly wage. And in Seoul, one of the most expensive cities in the world, that doesn't go very far. Next, a home. Paying rent in Seoul is insane, but the government doesn't want people to leave the capital because of it. So they're stepping in. Recently, they've promised to give families around $300 a month to help with housing, until the kid turns 2. Then again, $300 seems great, but it only covers about 11% of the rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in the city center. And last but not least, health care. Hospital bills are covered, but the couple must be married, on paper and everything. South Korea came up with all this to fix the problem. Otherwise, their population might get older, poorer, and more dependent on others for care. But when you think about it, all these incentives really come down to one thing: giving out cash. Even so, their demographic problem hasn't gotten any better. So the authorities had to come up with more creative solutions, like offering jobs with flexible hours for parents with kids under 5. And they can borrow things like toys or strollers from the government, totally for free. So why don't women want to become mothers? There's a bunch of reasons. But one of the most important is work. Women are getting more education and grabbing more opportunities in the job market than ever before. But a lot of jobs have crazy hours, with people working late every single day. So many women get stuck in that cycle, waking up early, going to work, coming home late, and sleeping. Then it all starts over the next day. They don't have time to meet a partner, and even less time to raise someone. In fact, education in general is one of the biggest reasons why birth rates are dropping. Spending so many years in school, then in college, means women are pushing back the age they have their first kid. Once they finish their education, they often want to focus on work and building their careers before starting a family. So they're not becoming moms in their teens or early 20s anymore. And by the time they hit 30, things aren't much better. Sure, they might finally land a stable job, but most employment policies still don't offer enough support for childcare. But it's not only education. Younger generations are getting delayed in, well, everything. I mean, it's way harder for them to tick off all the adulting boxes, like having a well-paying job or buying a nice house. And these things are usually a big part of whether people decide to start a family or not. Another reason people aren't having kids: putting a new human into this world is expensive and time-consuming. The average childcare costs in Australia, for example, have gone up faster than inflation. School tuition, even for public schools, takes a big chunk out of parents' budgets. Think about it. Computers, uniforms, field trips, extracurricular activities – all that adds up to the cost of financing someone's education. Over 13 years, parents spend over $80,000 on public education. And if we're talking about private schools, that number jumps up to almost $350,000. And don't worry, these costs are just for one kid. Now imagine having 2 or 3. So what is the solution? Well, there are 2 ways to tackle the problem that don't involve pushing the population to have more kids. Nations can keep their population healthier and employed longer, like what Singapore is doing. They're putting a lot of effort into raising the retirement age, offering midlife training, and encouraging companies to hire older workers, like those over 69. Another way is to encourage people from other countries to come in, especially young ones who are ready to work. That's, for example, the strategy Canada uses. Now, if the goal is really to get women to have more kids, a lot of countries use the baby bonus strategy, basically giving money and benefits to families, just like South Korea does. The problem is that some experts say it is pretty ineffective, as financial incentives don't address the complexity of the issue. For them, what these wealthy countries need to do is offer better career and housing opportunities for young people, like giving incentives for companies to offer more flexible hours or work-from-home options for young parents. They also need to push strategies to lower the cost of housing, especially in big cities. Plus, they need to focus more on the aging population, using technological innovations to support them. That would help not just parents, but families as a whole. So, what do you think?
Meet Hula Male, also known as the City of Hope. This nickname makes total sense since this artificial island is part of the Maldives' big plan to avoid being completely submerged in the near future. Hula Male was created by placing sand from the seafloor onto a submerged coral platform, and it worked! This city sits about 6 feet above sea level, which means it's twice as high as the Maldives' capital, Male. While more and more people are moving there to live, the island was also designed to serve as a temporary evacuation site during dangerous storms and typhoons. Seychelles is another gem in the Indian Ocean that's at risk of disappearing. Unfortunately, coastal flooding is becoming a common issue there, especially during spring tides and heavy rainfall. The problem is that their main island, Mahé, hosts about 90% of the country's population. Along the coast, it's only about 6 feet above sea level. Fiji is the 3rd tropical paradise on our list, and it's also a top pick for travelers. But this nation is in a tough spot, since it's located right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where huge storms can really turn things into chaos. Take Cyclone Winston. It hit Fiji back in 2016 and ended up costing them over $1 billion in damage. So one thing they're doing to protect themselves is planting mangroves along the coast and preserving the ones that already exist. These trees are awesome since they help reduce wind speed during cyclone emergencies and also combat erosion by trapping sediments. Egypt might be in trouble too. I mean, it's not like the whole country is going to be underwater and we'll only see the tips of the pyramids in a few years. But things could really change for them as coastal cities are facing a serious risk. Take Alexandria, for instance. 45% of its population already lives below sea level. If the city is flooded, not only will everyone have to move, but Egypt in general will suffer a major impact on its fish production. In Europe, one of the most at-risk populations is in the Netherlands, where about half the people live in areas below sea level. In the future, planning a romantic gesture with tulips for your girlfriend could become an impossible mission. The Netherlands is responsible for 2/3 of the world's tulip production. So if fields are taken over by saltwater, it's game over for the blooms. But the good news is that the Dutch have centuries of experience dealing with water, so knowing how to work with storm barriers and seawalls can prevent them from a doomsday scenario. The risks of rising sea levels probably aren't higher anywhere else than here in Tuvalu. This island chain, located halfway between Australia and Hawaii, could be the first state to become uninhabitable. Its stunning land is only about 9 feet above sea level. And just by looking at it on the map, you can see how narrow it is. In fact, the narrowest part in Fongafale is only about 65 feet wide. So even before higher tides become a real problem, the country's limited farmland could be flooded with saltwater. The next country on our list is the Philippines. This archipelago in Southeast Asia boasts some of the most stunning scenery, but it faces the risk of flooding for 2 reasons. First, due to rising sea levels, and second, because of crazy, unpredictable weather. Since 1990, events like cyclones, earthquakes, and tsunamis have cost the country over $20 billion. Have you ever heard of Vanuatu? This chain of islands, spread out between Australia and Fiji, could be flooded soon. Vanuatu was one of the first Pacific nations to relocate an entire community to a safer spot. Back in 2005, residents living in risky coastal areas of the northern island of Tegua moved to higher ground. Next up, the Marshall Islands, a country located in the Central Pacific. Studies show that 40% of the buildings in the capital city, Majuro, could end up underwater in the future. But this country isn't throwing in the towel just yet. They've got a game plan. They are fortifying the infrastructures of their low-lying airport, relocating key buildings to higher ground, and putting up seawalls on rural islands. Heading south, we've got Nauru. This is actually one of the smallest countries in the world, covering just 8.1 square miles. Today, it's home to 10,000 people, but it's on the brink of becoming uninhabitable. Water levels are rising about 3 times faster there than the global average. The Buada Lagoon sparks special concern since it's the only surface freshwater resource, and it's located only 16 feet above sea level. Our next stop in the Pacific Ocean is the Republic of Palau. Rising sea levels are no joke for them either, but protecting their crops, especially taro, is a priority at this moment. About halfway between Hawaii and New Zealand lies Samoa, and this country is dealing with a unique situation. Not only is the volume of water increasing there, but their land is also sinking. You see, a couple of strong earthquakes and tsunamis hit Samoa back in 2009. So as the crust bounces back to its original position, the overall land surface is actually going down. Because of this, their housing and main infrastructure could take a serious hit, especially since all their airports are along the coast. Let's head to Kiribati. This Pacific nation has a big problem with frequent flooding because most of its people and infrastructure are near the coast. Apart from the volcanic island of Banaba, none of Kiribati's land is more than 6.5 feet above the ocean. To tackle this situation and keep their population safe, they had this big idea of making a massive floating platform, kind of like the ones oil companies have. But the problem is that it would cost them a fortune, as the project is estimated to be around $2 billion. If visiting Vietnam is on your bucket list, you better hurry up. The top 10 things to do there mostly involve cruising to jaw-dropping spots like down to Ha Long Bay, also known as the Descending Dragons Bay. But by 2050, the surrounding land over there might be underwater. Another huge problem Vietnam is facing is that the main rice fields are getting salty. And if you're into Vietnamese food, you know how important rice is for them.
Right now, they're especially concerned about the Mekong Delta region being vulnerable. After all, this is a highly fertile area responsible for most of Vietnam's agricultural output, with over 50% of it being, rice. This nation is really putting in the effort to adjust to this new reality. They're flushing the rice fields in the Mekong Delta with fresh water to get rid of the saltiness. Our next stop is in the Caribbean Sea. Grenada is an island country, but you may know it as the Island of Spice, since its tropical climate is just perfect for cultivating things like nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and ginger. Unfortunately, Grenada and its incredible fertile soil also face an uncertain future of being submerged. Let's talk about the last country on our list, the Solomon Islands. 5 islands in this archipelago have already vanished beneath the waves, and 6 others are submerged by 20%. They include the Nusa Evili Island, which was once a hotspot to go to for a picnic in the early 2000s. Even though the situation is complicated, it's important to note that more than 300 of the islands there are inhabited. One thing about the Solomon Islands is that it seems like they're always in some kind of recovery mode, since the country often gets hit by tropical cyclones and flash floods. Their population is already working hard to save their homes from the rising seas by building stone walls along the coast, planting mangroves, and constructing houses in higher areas.
There's a mysterious island that appears and disappears like magic. Just like Schrödinger's cat, this Schrödinger's island exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Officially, it's called Sandy Island, and it once appeared in maps, but it was never there in real life. Australian scientists decided to solve the mystery once and for all by embarking on an adventure to find this elusive archipelago. But when they reached the coordinates, all they found was endless blue waves. It's like the island was playing a game of hide-and-seek with them. This story goes back to 1876. A whaling ship was crossing the area and reported an island. Whoever saw it said it was over 15 miles long north to south and around 3 miles wide, about the size of Manhattan, so not so tiny at all. But every time researchers went to visit the area, they found nothing. So in 1974, an official mission from New Caledonia declared that Sandy Island was simply not a thing and excluded it from all maps. People went on with their lives until they noticed that the island was appearing on Google Earth as a black blob. In 2012, another Australian expedition went out to check out the area to get some explanations. They had to write a eulogy for the long-lost island and explain what could have created this mess. For starters, mapping technology wasn't at its peak back in the 1900s. It was easy to get the coordinates wrong. Then there was the fact that the area is big on volcanic activities. It's likely that volcanic lava cooled down and created a raft of some kind. Let's say that the whaling ship went by, saw the volcanic raft, and thought it was land from a distance. But hey, it's just a guess. Humans have ventured far and wide across the globe, and it may have seemed at some point that we discovered each and every nook of our planet. But when Mount Liko popped up on Google Earth, scientists were overcome with excitement. This hidden gem in northern Mozambique is no ordinary rainforest. It's nestled inside a volcano. Determined to confirm the existence of this mysterious forest, experts assembled a team of top-notch scientists and specialists from around the world. The journey to Mount Liko was no walk in the park, with a daunting vertical rock climb standing between them and the forest. But after 6 years of planning and preparation, they were ready for the challenge. Once they got there, they saw it was even better than they imagined. The place was like a perfectly tended garden. The forest sounded unique and different from other rainforests. There were some insanely huge caterpillars that looked dangerous. And they even found ancient pots and evidence of an untouched human ecosystem. Ooh! Terra incognita means unknown land. And one of the largest unknown territories being uncovered today is the land beneath Antarctica's ice sheets. Below the snowy surface, there is an entirely new world of canyons, waterways, and lakes, which are now being mapped. One can't help but wonder, is there really liquid water below Antarctica's frozen surface? Yep. Water can exist without freezing due to pressure. The liquid water is the result of Earth's warm interior, and that's how we get things such as Lake Vostok. Now, you can't see it, but Lake Vostok is right here. Located in East Antarctica, it lies beneath 2.5 miles of thick ice. This huge lake is about 4,800 square miles. Humans could only discover it with the help of some top-notch technologies like seismic soundings and ice-penetrating radars. According to these scientists, it's likely that the lake has been there for up to 15 million years. Bhutan is on the map for, among other things, being the happiest country in all of Asia. But it kept a hidden gem for all these years, one of the world's tallest unclimbed mountains, Kunkar Pansum. Bhutan is enmeshed in the glorious Himalayan mountains. That's why the climbing community was beyond excited when they discovered an untouched mountain. Imagine being the first person to climb an unexplored peak. That would probably guarantee you a spot in the Guinness World Records for sure. The mountain has been untouched because of a Bhutanese law. For locals, the mountain peak is a sacred site, shrouded in mystery and legends. One of their beliefs is that the sacredness of climbing a mountain lies not in reaching its peak, but in truly communing with the mountain and enjoying the process. We got to admit, that is a bit of a newsflash for Westerners. If you're ever in the state of New York, make sure you check out the Aglo General Store. You'll have to drive somewhere around the Catskills to find a beautiful, grand, big nothing. Aglo is one of America's most famous paper towns, aka a fake town. But this case is different from Sandy Island. Aglo Town never existed, and it wasn't a mistake. You see, there's an old copyright practice amongst map makers. They add in paper towns so they can know when someone is simply copy-pasting their work. What they didn't expect is that this would get completely out of hand. Some say that one day a guy picked up a map at a gas station that had Aglo Town marked in it. The person decided to open a store over there and named it Aglo General Store. Some say the guy who opened this store faced a lawsuit from the map makers. Anyways, it only lasted enough years to become a national joke. Americans drove from all over the U.S. to get a picture of the town's fake welcome sign. And then we've got Bermeja Island, located in the Gulf of Mexico. This funky island appeared on many maps of the 16th and 17th centuries. It was probably drawn by Spanish explorers. Sure, the exact location varied from map to map, and its name sometimes appeared as Bermeja, but its existence was certain enough. The Bermeja Island was last seen in a 1921 Mexican map, and then, poof, it dropped out of the horizon altogether. People started talking and wondering, did the island sink? Was it destroyed? In 2009, 3 official investigations happened to search for the island. They used high-tech technologies to scour the Mexican seabed, but Bermeja was nowhere. Researchers had multiple guesses on what it could be. Let's delve on one of these ideas. The idea was probably made up by old-day explorers to mislead their enemies in search of land and gold. Well, that seems plausible. Now, let's take a look at Rio de Janeiro. Once, the city was filled with informal territories. These places are known as slums or favelas. They're like mini-cities inside the big city. Some favelas are known to be underprivileged territories, where dwellers don't get the same urban perks as other citizens, such as the sewage system and garbage pickups. These slums grew so quickly that the government didn't have time to keep track of their developments. So today, it's usually the dwellers themselves that name the streets and make do with whatever they have at their disposal. One of the biggest slums in Brazil is located in Rio de Janeiro, the so-called Hacienda, and it was only recognized as a neighborhood by the local government in the 1990s. Our own ocean floor is less mapped than Venus, Mars, and the Moon. In fact, 95% of our oceans are unexplored. Strange, right? We do have the available technology, which is mainly sonar soundings, sending wave sounds to the ocean bed and registering what they hear back. One of the main advantages of mapping the seabed more thoroughly would be to get more insight to marine hazards such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. Plus, there are so many unidentified marine life. This could give us a great insight into preservation and discovering the true dynamics of our marine ecosystems.
Some places don't look important until the world realizes they hold the keys to the future. That's the case with Canada's Arctic. For most of history, it was just ice, snow, rocks, caribou, and even more ice. But now, it's about to become one of the most important places on Earth, and maybe make Canada a global superpower. Why? Because it's hiding minerals that power electric vehicles, satellites, and missile systems, while the demand is skyrocketing. However, it's not just mining and having resources, it's also about control. Right now, China has a massive head start because it refines over 90% of the world's rare earths. That means if you want to launch a satellite, manufacture advanced electronics, or even just keep the lights on in your fancy smart home, odds are you're relying on China. And that makes a lot of world powers very nervous. Because when everything's going electric, the last thing you need is being dependent on your geopolitical rival. So now, the global clean tech treasure hunt is officially on. The US, Europe, Japan, Australia, they're all competing. However, the latest technology and untapped potential might give Canada the upper hand. Canada's had these minerals for decades, but with low prices, tough terrain, and no global rush, they mostly stayed untouched. However, Ottawa is finally stepping up its game. Back in 2022, Canada rolled out the Critical Minerals Strategy with billions in funding and tax perks to get companies digging. There's also plans to build the necessary roads, ports, and power lines to tap into those remote deposits up north. Canada already produces more than 60 minerals and metals, but 31 of them are now considered critical. 6 of those are having VIP treatment: lithium, graphite, nickel, cobalt, copper, and rare earth elements. But digging it up is just step 1. The real plan? Keep it local. Melt that frozen treasure into shiny new batteries right at home. That means not just mines, but also refineries, processing centers, and high-tech factories popping up where there used to be nothing but snowdrifts and silence. While others are talking, Canada's busy paving roads and stringing power lines. Slowly but surely, they're turning snowfields into a high-tech playground. Getting to all that buried treasure used to be nearly impossible. After all, we're talking about land so remote that roads literally stop hundreds of miles too early. The ground is frozen solid for most of the year. And even if you found something valuable, just getting out was a logistical nightmare. So what changed? Canada has an ace up its sleeve. Don't know about you, but I use it mainly for making memes and music. But geologists, they're scanning the Arctic like it's Minecraft with X-ray vision. Instead of drilling blind, they're using decades-old core samples, plugging them into AI, and getting shockingly accurate predictions about what's underground. It's like upgrading from a pirate's treasure map to a GPS that actually says, "Dig here." Companies like Geologic AI and Cobalt Metals are already doing this, pouring data into AI and getting X marks the spot hits for nickel, cobalt, and rare earths. In the Northwest Territories, Canada is running a pilot lab that uses AI and digital scanning to reanalyze decades-old rock samples. The goal is to spot hidden mineral deposits that old methods might have missed without digging a single new hole. All that sounds great, but maybe I made it sound simpler than it is. Digging up the Arctic is a logistical nightmare. For starters, this isn't just a remote patch of land. The Canadian Arctic is huge. Almost half the country, stretching over Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. We're talking about a region larger than India, with fewer people than a small city. Most of it is permafrost, wilderness, or ice-covered islands scattered across the Arctic archipelago. Temperatures go from barely 50 degrees Fahrenheit during summer to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, with ground that stays frozen for most of the year. Fun fact, did you know that negative 40 degrees happens to be the same as negative 40 degrees Celsius? It's the one temperature where both scales intersect. They climb at different rates, but eventually cross paths when it gets cold enough. Just a small trivia nugget for weather nerds like me. Anyways, You can't just roll in a truck and break ground in the Arctic. Up there, roads just stop. Want to build something? It can take years, and one nasty winter can put everything on ice. And if you want to continue up north, you need more of everything. More food, more fuel, more machines, which means even more money. Speaking of money, another chilling fact is how much this all costs. Mining in the far north is way more expensive than doing it in, say, Australia or Chile. An AI might tell you where the minerals are, but people and big machines still have to dig, and that costs a fortune. But that's not all. Most of the Canadian North is Indigenous land. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities have lived there for thousands of years, and mineral hotspots often sit right on their ancestral grounds. So when Canada talks about unlocking the Arctic, it's not just a question of roads and robots. It's a question of partnership and collaboration. And that's not optional. Legally, projects on Indigenous land require consultation and, in many cases, consent. The good news, some communities aren't just involved, they're leading the way. In regions like Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, Indigenous-owned corporations and world powers are already shaping how development happens on their terms. If Canada wants to pull this off, it's going to need more than tech and funding. It's going to need trust. So with all that in mind, can Canada pull this off? Honestly? With technological advancements and partnerships, it doesn't seem impossible. But Canada isn't just doing one thing right. It's doing a bunch of things at the same time. Let's recap. Hidden resources? Checked. New strategy? In place. Big funding? Approved. AI tools? Deployed. Indigenous partnerships? Underway. Infrastructure? Already breaking ground. It's a snowball turning into an avalanche. Exploration boosts investment. Investment speeds up roads. Roads unlock more deposits. More deposits attract more factories. It's a feedback loop, and if they keep feeding it, the whole Arctic operation could go from an idea to empire faster than anyone expects, giving a whole new meaning to the phrase frozen assets. But this doesn't just help Canada. It could save the US a whole lot of trouble. If all goes to plan, the US won't need to ship rare earths halfway across the planet. It can just look north, wave at the caribou, and get what it needs from its closest neighbor. That's why the US has publicly backed the effort, offering support and funding to help build a trusted North American supply chain. For Canada, this could be the moment it stops being just a supplier of raw materials and starts becoming a critical power broker in the clean tech economy. For the US, it's like discovering your neighbor has been secretly building a battery factory in their backyard, while you were building electric vehicles. And globally? Well, the abundance of resources tends to lower the prices, and that's always a good thing for us regular people. Cheaper cobalt, nickel, and lithium mean cheaper batteries, and cheaper batteries mean more affordable electric vehicles, energy storage, phones, laptops, the works. Now, don't get too excited just yet. Like we said, mining in the Arctic isn't cheap, but in theory, once Canada's clean tech engine is fully up and humming, more supply and shorter supply chains should gradually bring costs down. And it's not just about price tags, it's about stability. Right now, if one country cuts exports or gets caught in politics, everything down the line gets shaky. But with Canada stepping in as a reliable supplier, the global system might get a bit more breathing room. Manufacturers can stop sweating over single points of failure and start building with confidence.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.